What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Omni Sensei here with What If I Were Reborn in Lord of the Rings as Human-Elf Hybrid? The Greatest Ranger. Part 5. If you enjoy this type of content, please smash the like button into the fires of Mordor. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Don't forget to check out the original story linked in the description. Let's dive into the rise of a true ranger without further ado. General POV Bard's house. We appreciate your hospitality, Bard, Aldril said gratefully, not wanting to impose any further in someone else's home, especially knowing that the presence of the dwarves could bring trouble. Beside him, Bilbo slightly bowed his head, a common gesture in Hobbiton when expressing gratitude for hospitality. And indeed, Bilbo was a polite little hobbit. If anyone else from Hobbiton were here, they would have confirmed it. You were very kind to us, Mr. Bard. Allow me to say that you are one of the few who have welcomed us with such courtesy throughout our journey, he declared, standing with his hands on his hips and his head held high. Ugh, I hate it when he acts like that, Dwalin grumbled from the back of the group, and he truly did hate it. Throughout the journey, Bilbo's exaggerated politeness drove him crazy. His habit of being blunt was ingrained deep in his bones, so Bilbo's excessive courtesy made his skin crawl. Show some respect, Balin added, giving Dwalin a soft elbow to the ribs, which made him hiss in annoyance. But out of great respect for Balin, he said nothing, just muttered incomprehensible words. Yes, Dwalin, remember that Bilbo's courtesy has helped us quite a bit, Keely reminded him with a half-smile. Or have you forgotten when in Bree, Bilbo's courtesy helped us get through the gate without any trouble? I remember. If it weren't for his friendly attitude, those guards would have given you a good beating, Philly agreed, joining in with his brother. And then there was that time when that elf... All right, you don't have to remind me, Dwalin interrupted with clear annoyance. These two brothers could easily get under his skin, a gift, they had said. Stupid kids, he muttered under his breath. Ignoring the chatter of his companions, Thorin stepped forward. His face bore an air of pride as he looked at the man who had given them shelter and a way to enter the city unnoticed. He wouldn't show it, due to his dwarven pride, but he was grateful. On behalf of the expedition party, I thank you for your services, Bard, he said in a tone that wasn't too arrogant but certainly not cheerful. Thorin's attitude might seem amusing to those who didn't know him. His wet clothes and the faint smell he carried would make him appear more like a vagabond than a king. You're welcome. Be careful as you pass through the city. The night hides small cracks that could make you fall. Walk carefully and stay alert for the guards. Bard's words were spoken without malice. He could have made money by turning them in, and the dwarves knew it. But Bard, yes, the governor had offered a valuable reward for any dwarf who entered the city. But would Bard do that? Of course not. He was an honorable man. He had made a deal with the dwarves, and his moral code dictated that betraying them would go against his principles. Besides, the coins jingling in his pocket showed that the deal with the dwarves had been more beneficial. While the farewell with Bard was taking place, far from the group of dwarves, Tauriel and Legolas were engaged in their usual conversation, both hidden beneath their hoods that concealed their radiant beauty. They didn't want to draw attention, a burden they had to bear due to the beauty they were born with. Are you sure you want to go with him? Legolas asked with doubt. It will be very dangerous to face that dragon, he added, the concern evident in his voice. And how could he not worry? His dear adoptive sister would be accompanying the son of that famous adventurer, facing the largest dragon alive today, a feat he couldn't quite decide whether to call bravery or foolishness. Yes, I promised Lady Tindamil that when her son crossed paths with me, I would accompany him on his journey. And I don't plan on breaking my word. You, more than anyone, know how much I hate not keeping a promise, she said firmly. And indeed, she despised not fulfilling a promise, a trait deeply rooted in her being, a quality she had inherited from her late father. If Finduilas or anyone else who knew Beleg were to see Tauriel's attitude, they would shout, just like her father. Accepting his adoptive sister's words, Legolas said no more. He knew trying to convince her would be useless. Take care, he said reluctantly. What else could he say? He wasn't a particularly expressive elf unless he was with his beloved Sigrid. "Let's go, we must leave. Durance Day is near, and we only have a 2-day lead," a sharp voice interrupted, cutting their conversation short. Turning toward the source of the voice, they saw it was Thorin, issuing orders to march. "Take care, Legolas," Toriel added with an affectionate smile. She understood his concern, but she was no longer a child in need of protection. She was one of the most skilled elves with a bow and daggers in the entire elven kingdom of Mirkwood. There was no longer any need for her to be protected. Governor's Mansion, a meticulously constructed mansion made of the finest wood, stood in the center of the city, surrounded by a wide circle of water and finely built houses. This was where the city's most important people lived, a small group flaunting the wealth that most of the population did not have. The taxes from market sales and construction were clearly reflected in the extravagance with which this place was built. On the second floor of the mansion, built with the citizens' taxes, sat a tall man, his visible obesity noticeable from a distance. He proudly wore a luxurious, exquisite robe, his balding head framed by wisps of red hair that only accentuated his ugliness. His corpulent body was seated in front of a grand table filled with delicacies, fresh fruits and vegetables, lamb, pork, and venison, all served on finely colored plates, a stark contrast to those who only had a single fish to eat each day. If any of those people were here, they would exclaim in indignation. This man was naturally careless, uninterested in the food shortages plaguing the city he governed. A foolish attitude, indeed. Why neglect the very people who paid the taxes that allowed him to live in such eccentric luxury? "Governor, I regret to inform you that the princess and the elf prince are staying at Bard's house," Alfred said, standing at his side, watching as the governor ate like a pig, interrupting his meal with the news. Ugh. The news hit him like an arrow to the heart, causing him to choke on the mouthful of food he had. His fat face turned a dark purple, and in desperation, he grabbed a goblet of wine, the liquid flowing down his throat, clearing the piece of meat that had nearly killed him. Angrily, he threw the goblet across the table and with surprising speed for his weight, leaped from his chair, a jump that startled Alfred, causing him to step back in surprise. "You're an idiot. How long ago did you see them?" His thick jowls quivered with every word, a sight so horrid even Alfred found it repulsive, though surely the governor must have looked in a mirror before to know that. "Around 5 hours ago, my lord," Alfred said in a meek voice, shoulders hunched in fear and shame. He knew he had messed up, but he couldn't admit that he had forgotten due to the embarrassment they'd caused him. So, he opted for the simplest, easiest way to escape the situation. "But it wasn't my fault. Bard threatened me not to say anything, my lord," Alfred added with a trembling voice, displaying the cunning that had earned him the position of the governor's right-hand man. His deceit was such that he had managed to fool all the stupid inhabitants of Lake Town. Only Bard had seen through his schemes, a thorn in his side that he had tried to remove with lies and sharp words. But did it work? No. It had the opposite effect, fanning the flames of rebellion among the citizens. Rumors were circulating that they would rise up in arms to depose both the governor and him from power. The governor's obese face turned crimson, a sight that would have shocked anyone. This was a flaw of the man. His skin changed color depending on his mood. Red indicated anger and irritation, a darker shade meant sadness and shame, and his natural pale complexion was a sign of calmness and normality. "That damn Bard is surely plotting something," he bellowed angrily. "What are you waiting for? Get the guards. I'm going to greet the princes properly." With the expedition group, what a joke of security, Keely muttered as they walked through the slightly darkened city, lit only by the street lamps placed on nearby posts. In the distance, they could see the man in charge of lighting them. A seemingly simple job, yet it had become a tiresome routine, as evidenced by the bored expression on the man's face. On their way, they rarely encountered any guards, and the few they saw were sitting under piles of barrels, laughing and drinking. The issue wasn't a complete lack of security, it was the habit of only dealing with minor scuffles between rebellious youths. With no nearby villages and the dragon that had once tormented them long gone, the guards had become complacent. The elderly were the only ones who remembered the dragon's shadow over the city and its attacks on the unwary, stories now dismissed as mere tales. "That dragon over the city? Please," mocked the younger generation. "Just the ramblings of senile old folks." But for the elders who had lived through the dragon's torment, those words were an insult. "Oh great Vala," they prayed, "may that dragon never return to rain fire upon this city of fools." This complacency had caused the guards to relax their vigilance. After all, who would dare to enter the city unnoticed? Elves? "Don't be naive," they'd say. "What would the high elves want in this decrepit city?" "Well, it works to our advantage," Philly added, a smirk playing on his lips. "Finally. At least this time we'll have an easy path," Gloin muttered, a murmur that many heard, including Aldril, who glanced at the dwarf with disinterest. It seemed he hadn't learned to keep his mouth shut in time. As if summoning bad luck, the sound of footsteps was heard ahead, and several guards quickly appeared. Among them was Alfred, his face resembling an orc, easy to distinguish. At his side, a man so obese he struggled to move, sweating profusely. "What a fat man," was the unspoken thought of everyone who saw him, fatter than a pig and wider than their dear late friend Bomber. "Silence," Thorin whispered from the front. "Hide." But bad luck wouldn't leave them alone. Gloin's big mouth had caused it, and now they would pay the consequences. With a sudden movement, Gloin stepped on a wooden plank, causing it to break and sending a pile of barrels crashing down, drawing the attention of the governor and his entourage. "Who's there?" shouted the captain of the guard at the front. He faintly glimpsed a small figure and thought it might be a child. But to his surprise, when he got closer, a group of dwarves was lying on the ground, seemingly brought down by the fallen barrels. Surprised, he drew his weapon, followed by the other guards, who quickly surrounded the unsuspecting dwarves. "What is a group of dwarves doing at this hour?" the governor wondered aloud. "Surely trying to cause disorder, my lord," Alfred replied, his hunchback becoming more prominent as he bent down to look at the dwarf Gloin. "Or am I wrong?" "Heh! Get that awful face away from me," roared Gloin, landing a hard punch on Alfred's face. This action was taken as an attack by the guards, who approached and drew their swords even closer to the dwarves. Holding his bruised face from the punch, Alfred pointed at the dwarves while shouting, "Arrest them! Quickly!" The commotion had drawn the attention of the townspeople, who had been comfortably in their homes. One by one, they began to emerge to see what was happening, a natural human behavior. Their surprise was great when they saw a group of dwarves being arrested by the guards. In a corner, Aldril lay hidden, covering Toriel with a cloak belonging to his mother, one with unique properties that allowed him to hide from his enemies. This was the second time he had used it, having prepared for what was to come the moment Gloin spoke, and his intuition was correct. He managed to conceal Toriel with him, not that she needed it, but he wanted to avoid the bother of questions he was too tired to answer. The situation took a 180-degree turn when a dwarf stood before all the guards and declared in a majestic voice, "I am Thorin Oakenshield, son of Thrain and grandson of Thror, the rightful king under the mountain, and I have returned to my home." Thorin, realizing there was no other solution, proclaimed his true identity. His royal bearing became apparent, the wet clothes and dirt on his face unable to dim his regal presence. "And there it goes," Aldril murmured, predicting the conversation that would follow and the better treatment the dwarves would receive. He remained hidden with Toriel, avoiding drawing attention to Thorin's title. After all, it was extremely rare to see an elf with a dwarf, and Toriel's presence would only bring more questions Aldril wished to avoid. It was late at night, and the situation had unfolded as Aldril had predicted. Unlike what he remembered, the governor didn't question Thorin's title as king under the mountain. It was well known that neither elves nor dwarves would play or lie about the title of king. Soon enough, Aldril and Toriel rejoined the rest of the group, being greeted with surprise and curiosity. However, the questions Aldril had expected didn't come. Everyone seemed afraid to approach them, whether it was due to Aldril's intimidating presence or fear of Toriel's unusual beauty, he didn't know. While the group of dwarves was taken to a banquet fit for kings, Aldril, along with Toriel and Bilbo, were escorted to finely furnished rooms in the governor's mansion. They had been invited to join the dwarves, but they declined. Aldril was mentally exhausted, and since Toriel only felt comfortable with Aldril, she also refused, though no one bothered to ask her. Lying in bed, he ignored the excessive decoration, as it wasn't interesting to admire. After spending time in two elven kingdoms, human structures and decorations fell to the background. Settling into the large bed, he allowed himself to examine his system. What caught his attention was the world exploration, which had increased significantly. However, it wasn't enough to earn rewards. World exploration, 8.5%. His attribute points, on the other hand, were another story. A high number stood there, all due to the spiders and orcs he had killed along the way, particularly that bastard Borg, whose memory still made his fists clench with frustration and anger. Attribute points, 20. Wasting no time, he invested them all into his stats. He was soon to face that dragon, and there was no doubt he needed to grow stronger, even if it meant using all his attribute points. Strength level 2, Strength level 3, Constitution level 2, Constitution level 3, Agility level 2, Agility level 3, Mentality level 2, Mentality level 3, Attribute points, 0, an unparalleled strength coursed through his body, bringing comfort and power. If not for his desire to rest, he would have gotten up to test his new strength. He felt renewed, even the mental exhaustion had disappeared. However, as in all cases, his subconscious urged him to sleep. He hoped that with his newfound strength, he would once again have those dreams where he was taught the skills he had obtained. With that in mind, he allowed himself to drift into the world of dreams. Aldril's dream, there, in a field full of flowers and large trees, sat a woman on a rock. Her golden armor gleamed in the sunlight, the peaceful atmosphere bringing a sense of calm he hadn't felt in a long time. Her reddish hair cascaded down her back, and her pale skin radiated nobility. She was a beauty that could rival even the fairest of elves. Her eyelids opened as if sensing something, and her golden eyes settled on the figure she was ready to teach. "You took your time," she said calmly, standing up, revealing her great height and unmatched beauty. Aldril was stunned by the woman. His eyes widened as he watched her gracefully rise and place a winged Valkyrie helmet on her head. Her voice, magnetic and overflowing with power, echoed, "I am Maelnia, Blade of Miquella, and I am here to guide you." General POV, Aldril's dream Maelnia stood before him, a majestic vision that seemed to defy logic itself. Her natural way of moving was an art form, each step a dance that resonated with the force of the wind. The sun illuminated her reddish hair, which shimmered like dancing flames, and her skin glowed with an almost ethereal radiance. Aldril watched her, caught between admiration and fear. Those golden-pupiled eyes shone like two blazing suns, capable of intimidating even the bravest. In her presence, he felt insignificant, like a shadow barely able to grasp the essence of her magnificence. Only someone with the power to bring down the divine had faced her. The first and last defeat the unbeatable demigoddess had suffered. Now that woman who once held the title of the strongest had come to teach him. He wouldn't lie, he felt excited, exhilarated, torrents of emotion surged through his entire being, and who wouldn't feel the same? Only a fool wouldn't desire to learn from the strongest and wisest. "Raise your stance," she said with a gentle tap of her hand. "Maintain the speed and fleeting power that will prevail with the thrust." Her towering figure made her seem like a mother teaching her small child how to wield a sword. The lack of physical conditioning when using those lethal and elegant moves was nowhere to be found. His heightened stats had significantly increased his physical and mental condition. "You're too clumsy with your footwork," Maelnia added, her eyes fixed seriously on Aldril's stoic face. "Remember, you need to be fast. Don't hesitate in your movements, no matter how pathetic they may look. What matters is that they are deadly to your opponents." He didn't speak. He didn't feel he had the right to at that moment. He had opted to follow all her recommendations to the letter. Aldril knew it. This was no time for distractions. A confrontation was approaching, and he had to be ready. "Your concentration is admirable," Maelnia nodded, satisfied. Her beautiful features were striking, with no sign of the Rot's curse anywhere. "Now pay attention," she said as Aldril stopped shadowing with his sword, focusing entirely on Melinia's next move. As if the concept of gravity didn't apply to her, Maelnia floated a few meters into the air, her body curved into a dance-like position, one arm raised to her chest, her sword held beside her neck. Slash, slash, slash. That deadly dance was displayed in all its glory, more beautiful, more powerful, more lethal. Everything indicated that the recovery of her limbs and the elimination of her curse had allowed her to showcase her true strength. Those wind blades spread in a fleeting circle, and any innocent caught in that dance would be sliced into thin layers. The dance continued with another sweep of her body, her movements as graceful as a butterfly fluttering in the delicate wind, yet as dangerous as a hurricane wind, one that would destroy everything in its path. "This dance was inherited from my master," she said, turning as she landed softly. The flowers around remained unmoved, as if those wind blades were nothing more than a gentle breeze stirring them. "This dance has my personal touch," she continued, walking slowly towards Aldril. "Now, you will inherit it," she said. "It will be up to you whether you incorporate your own style into it." Everything around them began to blur, a fervent sign that the dream was ending. Aware of this, Aldril bowed respectfully, taking calm steps toward her. Gently, he took her hand in his, and with a chivalrous gesture, he brought it to his lips, giving it a soft kiss. "Thank you, my lady," he said respectfully. He wouldn't joke. She was the only person who had stirred such feelings of admiration and respect in him. Maelnia clearly accepted Aldril's gesture. After all, he would be her pupil, and she would be his master. "This won't be the last time we meet," she added, causing Aldril to look up in surprise, only to be mesmerized by her smile. "You are still too weak. There are many more things I need to teach you," she finished. Her figure began to gradually fade, and Aldril stepped back, admiring her towering presence. This was undoubtedly the strongest master he had ever had, and he reflected that only now, with his newfound strength, was he worthy of being guided by someone like Maelnia. Her piercing golden eyes locked onto his, and with a fleeting voice filled with seriousness, she spoke the words that would mark him for the rest of his journey. "The title of the unbeatable, the one who has never been defeated, will fall upon you. Do not disappoint me." With Toriel, it was not the best moment for the elven beauty. No matter her grace, she couldn't escape the dream world that tormented her. What had started peacefully, like a natural dream, if such a thing existed for elves, soon took a darker turn. Like humans, they too possessed the gift of dreams, but oh, what a cruel surprise when those dreams could become premonitions. Just like now, as she found herself in Lake Town, the dreary city of worn wood and fog that obscured everything in its path. But this time, the town wasn't as she had seen it before. No, now it was engulfed in flames. Charred bodies were piled everywhere, the once cold city now a burning hell. Fire devoured everything in its path, the oppressive heat crashing against her face. She could hear the screams of the few survivors begging for help. Boom! A deafening sound erupted near her, lifting clouds of ash that momentarily blurred her vision. The flames in the area of the impact extinguished, snuffed out by the force of the blast. She watched in horror as a massive figure rose slowly from the destruction. Reflected in her pupils was the enormous form of a reptilian beast emerging from the chaos, its reddish, scaly skin smeared with ash and blood dripping from its body. The beast's wings, which should have carried it majestically through the air, were tattered and torn. "You miserable wretch! I will burn you until nothing remains." She heard the beast roar. She recognized him from the paintings. This was none other than the abominable dragon Smog. But who was he talking to? She wondered. "Try if you can, you pathetic lizard," she heard another voice in the distance. Toriel turned in its direction, and there, atop the bell tower, was the man who made her heart race. Aldril stood with blood streaming down his head, a grin, one of madness? No, it wasn't that, a grin of pure exhilaration on his face. "I hope you don't run like a coward this time, like you did with my mother," Aldril added. Toriel took a step back, stunned by the scene before her. It would forever be etched in her subconscious. The fearsome Smog, his reptilian face contorted in palpable rage, towering over the town. The sheer pressure emanating from both combatants crushed her. She could barely breathe, feeling utterly insignificant. One thought crossed her mind as she witnessed the scene: I would only be in the way of this fight. "I will kill you, you wretched inferior being," she heard the dragon roar, hurling his enormous bulk toward Aldril. In response, Aldril leaped into the air, both swords gleaming under the starry night. A clash was imminent. Yet, the next scene faded, the tormenting dream beginning to blur. Toriel awoke with a start, cold sweat tracing the curves of her beautiful body, her heart racing. "I must save the people of this town," she murmured. The dream had been a sign, a prophetic dream as her mother used to say, a gift possessed by only a few elves. This was a message. She had to save as many lives as possible. She would need to speak to Aldril, inform Legolas. They would have to move the people of this town. The town that would become Aldril's battlefield. General POV Aldril, now it's up to me to hold the title of never having been defeated, he murmured, recovering from that dream that had exhausted him so much. Yes, unlike those that passed like a fresh spring breeze, this dream brought him many benefits, as well as extreme fatigue that made him shudder at any sudden movement. He had to get up despite the pain. Today was the day they would leave for Erebor. Today would be the day he would meet that affable dragon whom the dwarves, and the elders who still remembered such a creature soaring through the vast sky hunting its prey, so greatly feared. Erebor was half a day's journey away. They had to leave early. Thorin mentioned before going to sleep that he didn't want to waste much time in the city. At the dwarves' request, they had stayed that day in Lake Town, enjoying the pleasures of a good banquet. He stood up despite the pain in his body and the constant urging of his subconscious to stay in bed longer, savoring the delights of procrastination. But his unbreakable will allowed him to fight off that thought. Ugh. With pain, he stretched his tired body, which was screaming for more rest. However, the elven stone firmly tied around his chest began to work. With a faint green glow, as if nature itself was manifesting in person, embracing him with its warmth, Aldril's body began to progressively recover with each passing second. He estimated that by midday, he would be in optimal condition. It wasn't as if anything would happen during that time. The very fate would allow him to rest. Tock tock, the soft sound of someone knocking on his door pulled him out of his apparent daydream. Frowning slightly, his curiosity piqued. Who would visit him so early in the morning, he thought. Who is it? He asked. Toriel, he heard. He quickly recognized that sweet feminine voice. He wouldn't lie, he was intrigued as to why she would come for him so early in the morning. He didn't dwell on it much and moved simply toward the door, opening it, only to be surprised by Toriel's state. There, standing before him, was the red-haired elf who so often quickened his heart, but right now, her beauty was overshadowed by the frown and deep concern evident in her eyes. This left him perplexed and a bit fearful that something had happened, but it would be impossible for anyone to harm her in this place. Toriel was far too strong for human warriors, a testament to the great strength elves possessed. It wasn't like in his memories, where they were easily killed by a mere orc. No. He had witnessed how just 2 elves easily took down over 20 orcs in the attack that claimed the life of one of his dear friends. He had learned from whispered stories that elves were terrifying in combat. They needed to overwhelm us in numbers to kill one of ours, he heard Glorfindel say in one such conversation. He quickly dismissed the notion that someone had hurt her. Those deep green eyes looked at him with both affection and concern. Not wanting to dwell on it further, he got straight to the point. Is something wrong, Toriel? He asked, genuinely worried, a gesture that earned him a small smile from the elf, who nodded at his question. We need to talk, she said. I had a vision of what's to come, words that immediately garnered Aldril's full attention, prompting him to adopt a more serious demeanor. Come in, he said, stepping aside for Toriel to enter. What did you see in that vision? He asked, getting straight to the point. It wasn't a time to drag things out. They were about to leave, and he needed to address this quickly. Fire, death, and you, alongside the dragon. Bard's house, they're complete idiots. Bard roared in fury. He regretted ever bringing those dwarves. Who could have imagined that among them was the heir to the throne of Erebor? He knew better than anyone that that cursed dragon was still alive. He clung to the black arrow fervently, keeping it as a safeguard. Now, he would have to use it against the dragon's imminent attack. Did they really believe the dwarves could kill the dragon, presumably the largest one alive today? He wasn't naive. An army of those dwarves hadn't left a single scratch on it. Would 13 dwarves make any difference? He thought, shaking his head in utter disappointment. The king has returned. At last, we'll have gold, and our lives will improve, the governor said, a complete foolishness. Death and fire is what they'll bring, Bard thought, recalling those words. However, it was understandable that the citizens had been tempted by such sweet promises. To them, Thorin was like an overflowing spring in the midst of their desert. Getting gold in exchange for helping the king under the mountain was hope for those in need, and Bard could understand that. He might have done the same if he were ignorant of the dragon's presence. "They're just legends," the young one said when he mentioned the dragon. "Do you want to stop these people from getting gold?" Alfred asked, mocking Bard's refusal to help the dwarves. "Citizens of Lake Town, now you can see Bard's true face." Alfred shouted with fervor, smearing Bard's reputation. The people, lured by the promise of free gold, abandoned him. Curses and rejections echoed in that place. It didn't matter if Bard had been a good man, what a good man Bard was. But those ungrateful people had let themselves be blinded by the promise of wealth. His fists clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned white from the loss of blood circulation. The memory of that night haunted him. They were ungrateful, foolish, but they were people who would die if he didn't act. His duty told him he had to save them. He was a descendant of Girion, Lord of Dale. He had a debt to repay to those who descended from the once prosperous valley. "I trust you'll keep them safe," he said to the elegantly dressed elf. Legolas was a blessing in these moments. Bard needed to keep his children safe, and the only way to do that was by asking for the Elven Prince's help. "I will, Mr. Bard. Rest assured, they will be in no danger in my father's realm," Legolas replied. "Father, I want to stay and defend the city with you," his son shouted. They all knew from Bard what consequences would follow if the dragon was awakened. "The son of that adventurer is with the dwarves," Legolas had said, but Bard preferred to be cautious and ensure his children's safety. "No, you have to stay with your sisters. You must protect them," Bard replied, silencing his son, who bowed his head in resignation. Talk, the sound of someone knocking at his door interrupted their heated discussion. "Get lost," Bard said in frustration, thinking it was those foolish youngsters teasing him about the supposed dragon. Talk, however, the knocking persisted. Frowning, Bard approached the door, only to be greatly surprised by the sight of the red-haired elf accompanying the son of that adventurer. Without giving her a second glance, he noticed how she focused all her attention on Legolas. "What's wrong, Toriel?" Legolas asked urgently, quickly moving to the door. If she had come, it was for something very important. "There's no time. We have to get these people out of here, or fire and death is all that awaits them." "General POV, Bard's house, what do you mean?" asked Legolas, bewildered. "Did you have a vision?" He wasn't unfamiliar with such occurrences. Over the years, his mother had predicted many future events, allowing the elves of Mirkwood to avoid danger and ambush spiders or orcs that ventured too far. "Yes," confirmed Toriel. "We don't have much time. We need to get the people out of this city," she said urgently. Beside her, Bard frowned deeply. Visions, he wondered. His father had once mentioned that some elves were born with a gift of foreseeing future events. Now, hearing Toriel claim she had seen a vision where the townspeople died filled him with deep fear, reflected in his interruption of their conversation. "What did you see?" Interruptions were something Toriel greatly disliked. However, as an understanding elf, she did not show displeasure or anger. Instead, with her naturally stoic expression, she gazed deeply at the man who had helped the dwarves, and apparently, someone Aldril liked. "I saw the dragon smog burning the city," she replied, causing Bard's face to pale. His instincts had been right. He had not been wrong in being cautious with his children. Now he was sure that those dwarves would wake the dragon, bringing massacre to the naive people of Lake Town. "Damn it! We have to stop those stupid dwarves," he shouted in frustration, quickly preparing to leave his rundown home, only to be stopped by Toriel's indifferent voice. "They're already gone. Chasing them is useless," she said. She knew facing the dragon was madness, but she had seen it in her vision, fire, destruction, and there, standing boldly without fear, Aldril faced the dragon head-on, with no doubt or fear in his eyes, only excitement. Was it because his adrenaline fueled that emotion? She didn't know, nor did it matter. Bard's desperation at the mention of the dwarves' departure was noticed by Legolas, who promptly exchanged a glance with Toriel, which she immediately understood. Turning around, she noticed the desperate eyes of Sigrid, and with determination, she left Bard's house. "Where are you going?" "Legolas!" Sigrid cried out in fear. "I must speak to the governor of this town," he said, stopping at the door. "Toriel will take you to my father's kingdom," he continued, capturing her attention, to which she nodded. "Yes, I will take them," she reaffirmed. "I will ask the king for help. We will need a place to keep all the people who want to come with us safe. The king beneath the mountain, the king of carved stone, the lord of silver fountains, shall return to his land." They sang, accompanied by shouts, dancing, harp music, and violins. It was truly a farewell worthy of a king. That song, although incomplete, was sung with joy, and it was so ancient that not even the elders remembered it fully. "What a grand farewell," Philly and Keely said, and it was true. It had been a long time since these people had shown such happiness. Not even the elders could recall when there had been such an unparalleled celebration. Food, petals, roses, and flowers were distributed by the governor's men, who, quite cunningly, took advantage of the situation to improve the man's image. With Thorin Oakenshield's promise, the gold distributed for their cooperation would be divided equally. Every person would receive 2 pieces of gold, and all the rest would go to him, the governor of this city. Such a despicable thought, those who knew him would say. But what could the others do if he kept the gold? It was a morning like no other. They had been given a boat for their departure. The crowd seemed to have not slept. Early in the morning, they came to bid them farewell. These dwarves were not used to such favor. Their past experiences with humans were limited, perhaps 1 or 2 blacksmithing jobs, but nothing more. Now, being sent off as heroes brought them a very different feeling. Their usual experience of disdain from other races seemed to have vanished this morning. As they passed each house, the families were there, celebrating and bidding them farewell with grace. "Oh, brave heroes, raise your voices. The burning flame shall fall today. With cunning and valor, hope arose. In the dragon's shadow, freedom will come." New songs resonated with every stroke of the oars, songs about the fall of that infamous dragon, inspired by those so old they remembered the time of the dragon. And they were so ancient they could barely stand, hopeful that the dwarven heroes, as the younger ones called them, would defeat the dragon. These new songs were passed down to their grandchildren, spreading from mouth to mouth throughout Lake Town. Those songs, could they be for Aldril? The dwarves murmured, especially Keely, Philly, and Nori, who, being the youngest, were the most spirited of the group. "Of course, they're for Aldril," Gloin jovially affirmed. To outsiders, the dwarves' cheerful demeanor might have made them forget the loss of Bomber. But how naive. These dwarves were grieving, though the promise made to the deceased made them act cheerfully, trying to suppress the sadness that would be inappropriate for the moment. The one mentioned, Aldril, remained stoic. He had heard the songs and seen the radiant joy of the townspeople. He was neither happy nor cheerful. He stayed focused, determined. With every stroke of the oar, his heart raced. Toriel's vision had shown that Smaug would somehow end up destroying Lake Town. In that vision, he hadn't been able to stop it at Erebor. It wasn't his fault for staying focused, even if it made him seem odd to the more boisterous dwarves. Only the most experienced understood what was on his mind. Thorin and Balin made no comment. Instead, they looked at Aldril with admiration. His presence evoked strength and danger. Only the most seasoned could sense it, and luckily it was only them. Otherwise, the younger and less experienced ones would be crying in fear at Aldril's powerful aura, one that had grown like a raging sea after his lesson with Maelnia. Every row brought anticipation for the dwarves, each stroke bringing them closer to home. After more than 4 hours of rowing and enduring the muscle pain, their reward came when the fog finally lifted. There, grand, imposing, and glorious as the older ones remembered, stood their home. There lay the lonely mountain. How spectacular! Nori exclaimed in awe. By the great All! It's too beautiful! Keely muttered, stunned. Is this the lonely mountain, uncle? Philly asked with a radiant smile. Yes, Thorin confirmed, admiring the lonely mountain, lost for a few seconds in his memories. They were close. Their journey would soon come to an end. With renewed expression, he allowed himself a slight smile. We will dock soon, he said. Prepare to disembark. Mirkwood, dear? What happened? Where is Aldril? Asked a confused Thalwyn, and she truly was. Her dear daughter stood beside the young human girl who had stolen her son's heart, accompanied by two other humans she assumed were her brothers. "Mother, I've come seeking help," Toriel said directly, her face showing concern. "I've had a vision, and in it, all the people in that city die under the dragon's fire," she explained without giving Thalwyn time to respond. "That place will be the battlefield for Aldril, and we need to save these people," she continued, urgency in her voice. "Very well." Thalwyn didn't refuse to help. Though her relationship with humans was mostly commercial, they too were the creation of the great Eru, and her morals would not allow her to leave the people of that lake city to face such danger alone. Moreover, she took visions very seriously, a trait Toriel also had, perhaps due to her true mother. She didn't know, nor did it matter. "Go, inform my husband," she ordered the elven escort who had told her about her daughter's return. "Where is your brother, dear?" Looking around, Thalwyn couldn't find her son, who she assumed would be with the young human girl if her presence didn't indicate otherwise. "He went to speak with the governor of that city," Toriel explained. "He went to warn him about the dragon's imminent attack." -12 hours later, "Is this everyone?" an incredulous Toriel asked. There were so few people who had heeded the warning, mostly families filled with children and the elderly, with a few young adults who reluctantly accompanied their relatives. "Yes, the rest dismissed my warning," Legolas commented with equal frustration. The small group barely numbered 200, but it was no longer their concern. Those ignorant people would suffer the consequences of having taken the warning so lightly. They had been so skeptical that they dared not believe an elf, one who was said to only speak the truth. "It's just a legend. Our dwarven heroes will kill it if there's really a dragon," they said in their naivete. They had no concept of the fear a dragon could invoke, let alone the largest dragon in Middle-earth. "Let us pray to the Vala that not all will perish," Thalwyn said from beside them. They had settled those who believed them close to the Elven Kingdom, in a place far from the city, protected by the vines imbued with the blessing of the Vala Yavanna, courtesy of Thalwyn. "What is that?" In the dark of night, from which the singing and music of Lake Town could still be heard, a barely visible figure was spotted in the sky. They had taken their time moving the people, and now darkness had completely claimed the daylight. "It looks like a little bird," a child commented, heard by her family members, who raised their eyes only to panic at the immense figure. Even from this distance, its magnificence was undeniable. "It has begun." At some point, Finduilas had appeared beside Thalwyn, startling both Legolas and Toriel, who hadn't sensed her approach. "Begun what?" asked a confused Legolas, only for his question to be answered by the scream of one of the refugees. "A dragon!" The scream immediately silenced the rest of the refugees, who looked up and saw the fearsome dragon approaching their beloved city. Panic overtook them, but in that moment, a majestic and soothing voice was heard. "Silence! You are safe here." Thalwyn's magnificent voice quieted the upheaval of the refugees. Calmed by such a beautiful voice, they stopped screaming. They did not see the figure of the elven woman, but by her voice alone, they could tell she was a beauty beyond compare, a true work of art. But poor them, for they could not admire the grace of Thalwyn, a Vanya elf, known among the Eldar as the fairest of all Eru's creations. Now that the crowd was calm, Thalwyn and the others watched with a mixture of fear and nervousness as the dragon savagely shook itself in the air. A vague figure of a man could be seen on its back. Finduilas, at Thalwyn's side, observed the figures with fear and hope. Her hands clasped in prayer, she murmured words that made Toriel and Legolas widen their eyes and pay closer attention. "The contender for the strongest existence in Middle-earth vs. the greatest dragon of Middle-earth," she whispered. One of the greatest battles of this age had begun. General POV hours earlier the snow lay settled atop the peak of the Lonely Mountain, a natural covering indicative of the typically harsh climate of the region, exhausting to any not accustomed to it. Any adventurer daring enough to brave such conditions would likely flee in horror from the bitter cold. The sky presented a beautiful view if only one could look up, but the harsh reality was different. The dwarves moved forward with heavy expressions. The joy of nearing their journey's end was dampened by the dreadful sight before them, and dreadful it truly was. The land, once vibrant, was now desolate though, as Thorin and Balin had once described, it had been green and full of life. Now, it was only a stark, charred expanse stretching into the distance. They had entered the territories of that feared dragon. "What a miserable place," Keely muttered, his usual cheer soured by the depressing scene. Was all of this caused by the dragon? "That and more," replied Balin, who walked beside him. They had been heading westward for a few minutes, following the map to locate the hidden door. Thorin had sent others southward where the main entrance lay, but to no avail. From a distance, they could see enormous stones blocking any passage. Perhaps a giant beast could break through with ease, but they were dwarves, small, and their strength would hardly suffice to remove those immense boulders. Their position provided a vast view of the mountain's foothills, where they could see the main gate of Erebor and a rushing river flowing peacefully. It was as though the dragon's fire had never ravaged the land. The water remained as clear as Thorin and Balin remembered it. "What ruins are those?" Bilbo asked, his gaze fixed on the remains of a once beautiful city. Its architecture, a collaboration between humans and dwarves, must have been a magnificent sight. "That's the city of Dale," Balin said sadly. "Or what's left of it," he concluded, his somber mood deepening. He was both saddened and angered, still remembering the lush green fields, the lively chatter that had filled the city, and the bells that marked morning, midday, and nightfall. "Let's go up," Thorin reminded them, noting the varied expressions as they all observed the enduring destruction. Perhaps the dragon's influence or some other cause had prevented these gray lands from returning to their former glory. After a few minutes, the expedition party climbed higher up the mountain's slope. The cold hit like a snakebite, and the icy wind sent shivers through the dwarves less tolerant of the climate. The older ones, like Thorin and Balin, carried on as though strolling through a spring meadow. But Keely, Fili, Nori, and even Bilbo, shaken by the cold, trembled with each step. "There's too much silence here," Aldril commented, cautiously surveying the surroundings. No birds flew in the area, and no rodent scurried along the slope, a clear sign that the animal's natural instincts warned them of lingering dangers on the mountain. "It's only natural," Thorin replied. "Animals can sense danger." He paused to look around, raising his head and scanning from side to side like a possum peeking out of its burrow. "These places are still unsafe. But let's waste no more time," he said, dispelling the dark thoughts swirling in his mind. "Spread out and search." They had arrived at the location marked on the map, and though he wouldn't admit it, he felt a surge of excitement. Still, he needed to remain calm. "All right," Aldril murmured as the group dispersed along the slope, each looking for the dwarf statue that marked the hidden entrance. To many, it would simply seem like a carving on the mountainside. Activating his hawk vision, Aldril inspected the area, finding only barren land. He recalled a certain area where the statue might be, so he continued scanning. However, despite his search, he found only rocks and scorched earth. The dwarves had hidden the statue well, making it naturally difficult to locate. Back then, only King Thror knew the exact directions, later passing them to Thorin's father, Thrain, who eventually entrusted the map to Gandalf, hoping it would fall into Thorin's hands. His last wish was for his son to reclaim Erebor, a dream that would have been impossible without fate's hand, which brought Thorin together with Aldril. "Found anything?" Nori shouted from a distance. "Nothing yet," replied Gloin. "What about you, Keely?" Balin asked. "Nothing here either," Keely responded. "Nothing on this side either," Fili added. One by one, the dwarves' voices echoed across the desolate mountain, aptly named the desolation of Smog by outsiders. And desolate it was, reduced to barren paths and scorched earth by the dragon's wild fire. Aldril furrowed his brow in concentration, his intense gaze scanning the surroundings. The dwarves often joked about his fearsome expression when he was focused, those honey-colored eyes scrutinizing every inch as if he were an eagle hunting its next prey. And indeed, he found something, a hidden path that might have gone unnoticed if not for his incredible vision. "I found something," he shouted to alert the others. Nearby, Bilbo also noticed the path, either by luck or destiny, but since Aldril had already announced it, he refrained from shouting himself, choosing instead to quietly follow alongside the rest of the dwarves, who rushed toward Aldril's discovery. "What did you find?" Thorin asked, his excitement evident as he quickly made his way to Aldril's side. Today was Durin's day, so time was crucial. It was a blessing that Aldril was with them. They wouldn't waste more time than needed. "There," Aldril pointed. "There's a path leading up the slope on that side of the mountain," he explained to the great relief of the dwarves. "What are we waiting for, then? Let's go." Keely cheered, grabbing his brother Philly and pulling him along. Nori joined in as well, and the younger, more energetic dwarves dashed up the trail, their small feet moving quickly. They ignored the barren landscape and the charred patches of earth, leaving behind the somber mood for a moment as joy bubbled over like a spring. Who wouldn't be thrilled? Their long journey, filled with stories and hardships, was nearing its end, and the young dwarves couldn't hide their excitement. Even Dwalin, usually the grumpiest of the group, followed closely, along with Gloin, who, despite his age, moved with the eagerness of a young dwarf in love. "Don't run so fast," Balin called out, a smile lighting up his face. "Remember, we're not as young as they are," he added, making the rest of the group chuckle. "Who are you calling old, Balin?" Gloin snapped, only to be interrupted by an enthusiastic shout from Keely, Philly, and Nori, who cried out from the distance. "There's a statue here," Nori announced. "And some stairs too." Keely yelled. "Uncle, hurry up," urged Philly. The group quickly arrived at the statue, an imposing figure standing amidst the desolation. It was the massive form of a dwarf, his beard carved from stone, his armor finely sculpted, and in his hands he held a warhammer. He stood like a guardian, defiant against the barren wasteland. "Good eye, Aldril," Thorin said with a smile of joy. They had found the entrance, and with Durance Day upon them, they had plenty of time to enter. Without delay, he began to ascend the stairs. There was an unspoken understanding among the dwarves. Let Thorin go first. He was, after all, the king of Erebor and rightly the first to enter. Inside Erebor, Smaug lay comfortably atop a mountain of gold, his reddish scales a striking contrast against the treasure. Today had been strange. An uncomfortable feeling had kept him from sleeping well. Rising slowly, his immense, intimidating figure moved carefully, letting the gold slide down his scales like a gentle rain. He sniffed the air, trying to sense if someone had dared to intrude into his domain, or worse, tried to steal his treasure. He would show no mercy to any who dared take even a single coin. But the great Smaug was mistaken. His keen sense of smell detected nothing amiss. His lair was empty, with only gold to keep him company, and that was more than enough. He took a step forward, finding a spot to resume his sleep. Crack. As he moved, he stepped on something, a familiar, sickening crunch. Lifting his massive claw slightly, he saw the remains of a dwarf crushed beneath his foot. Seeing the skeleton brought back memories. Before he'd sealed off his lair completely, foolish and brave dwarves had once dared to challenge him, as had humans, all of whom now lay either digested by his stomach's acid or reduced to ashes by his fire. Such pitiful creatures, he sneered at the pile of bones. There was pleasure in seeing the remains of his victims. This dwarf had died under his claws, and Smaug had told them before killing them, "You should feel honored to die by my hand." He lay back down, slipping into his deep sleep once more. The uncomfortable feeling had passed, probably because he just needed a new position. He paid it no further mind. After all, who would dare challenge him again? General POV, ugh, those stairs were too high, Philly complained as he collapsed at the top. They had reached a small plateau behind the head of the stone statue. The way the stairs were built had made their ascent difficult. The steps were too high for their size, and at times, Aldril had to help Bilbo climb a few of them. Why would they build them like that? Keely asked, agreeing with his brother's statement. They weren't built for climbing, Thorin interrupted, his exhaustion evident on his face. Their construction is more focused on descending. After all, that hidden door was an emergency exit, able to be opened from the inside, but only accessible from outside on Durance Day, something Aldril honestly thought was foolish, but it was a dwarf matter, and he had nothing to do with whatever was on their minds when they built this secret door. Despite his obvious fatigue, Thorin managed a smile, one rarely seen on his face. "Let those who laughed at us remember that these foolish dwarves managed to reach and enter Erebor," he said with a boost in his spirits. His declaration earned laughter and joy from the other dwarves, who cheered and danced, expressing their great relief at finally reaching the end of their journey. Balin, though also feeling happy, reminded the group that the hardest part was yet to begin. "I hate to interrupt your happiness," But aren't you forgetting something? There's still that dragon. Yes, our journey is over, but our biggest problem has just begun. Balin is right, said Gloin, surprising everyone and prompting them all to look at him oddly, which he noticed. What? Did I say something wrong? He asked, frowning. No, not at all, it's just unusual for you to be so calm, added Philly, lying down with a mocking grin that irritated Gloin, who grumbled furiously. What do you mean by that? Nothing, just that it's strange for you to endorse a sensible idea, Keely chimed in, backing up Philly. And besides, you and Dwalin are the most foolish. He added this, almost laughing out loud at the furious expressions of the dwarves he mentioned. I am not stupid. Dwalin shouted. You damn kids need a good smack on your backside, he continued, sounding even more irritated. The stupid one here is Dwalin, not me. Gloin retorted, making Dwalin glare at him. What did you say? That's enough. Thorin interrupted in a loud voice. Though reluctant, the dwarves fell silent, not wanting to anger Thorin. Keely Philly, that's enough, Thorin reminded them, looking at his nephews. He cared for them deeply, but sometimes these young dwarves brought out the worst in others with their constant jokes. Let's not waste any more time. Search for the keyhole, he ordered, prompting the dwarves to set off without objection. Behind them, Aldril kept observing the rocky wall, his hawk-like gaze fixed as if hunting prey. He looked carefully, trying to see if he could locate the keyhole without having to wait for the last light on Durin's day. But here lay the problem. This entry was specially crafted with magic, that mysterious magic in this world. It was said that this door was cloaked in concealment magic by a wizard who was a disciple of the two blue wizards from the Astari. Yes, it was rumored that they taught magic to those who could sense it. Why would they do this? A good question, but not hard to answer. If Gandalf saw hope in Middle-earth through the hobbits, these blue wizards taught magic in the hope that those with magic might stop Sauron. Sadly, it never worked out. After all, the hearts of men are very weak and easily swayed. Has your keen sight found anything? Bilbo asked beside him, having long since stopped searching the wall, unlike the dwarves who were still looking. Bilbo returned to examining the map, trying to find some clue. No, it seems this door is layered with magic that prevents the keyhole from being visible, Aldril replied, averting his gaze. Nodding, Bilbo made no further comments and focused on the map. The daylight was slowly beginning to fade, further frustrating the dwarves, who kept searching urgently, trying to find any sign of the keyhole. Noticing the light starting to disappear, Thorin, in a desperate act, shouted, "Hit the wall, break it down." An order the dwarves, just as desperate, obeyed, and soon the clash of weapons echoed across the desolate plateau. But how could simple weapons bring down a wall imbued with magic? As if it were paper disintegrating in water, their weapons, which had accompanied them throughout their journey, broke. It was significant. Those weapons no longer served to protect them. They had fulfilled their purpose, and there was no need to exploit them further. This was a sign for Thorin, who turned to look at Bilbo and Aldril, noticing they were examining the map. With a glimmer of hope, he approached them. "Have you found anything?" he asked, his voice tinged with hope. His spirits lifted at Bilbo's words. "Yes, with Aldril's help, I found this strange phrase," he said, prompting Thorin to gesture for him to continue. "It mentioned something about a thrush striking a nut," Bilbo replied, much to Thorin's surprise. "A thrush?" Thorin murmured. "Yes, like that one over there, coming this way," Aldril said calmly. He hadn't intervened because he knew that sooner or later, this bird would appear to help them find the keyhole. "Don't move," Thorin whispered immediately. It was fortunate he'd spotted the thrush, giving them enough time for the others to stop moving and stay still, letting the bird come closer. "Everyone, don't make a single move," Thorin emphasized in a low voice. Due to the bird's proximity, the dwarves could hear him clearly and, remaining as still as statues, watched as the bird flew toward them without worry. Unfazed by the dwarves' presence, the bird, holding a nut in its beak, landed near a rock beside Bofur. It wasn't afraid of the dwarves. These types of birds were already accustomed to their presence and were naturally quite sociable, a magical touch of this world. With precise hops, the bird bounced between Bofur's legs, happily jumping about. Not even the desolate wasteland or the inherent danger near the mountain could make it retreat. Why should it? This was its usual spot for cracking nuts. There was something about that wall that made it easy to split them open. As the bird tapped the nut against the wall, the last ray of sunlight illuminated a section of the wall just above where it was striking. There, a keyhole appeared, surprising the dwarves, who quickly ran toward it. The bird, not understanding what was happening, took its nut and flew away, fortunately having already cracked it open. Crack! The door opened. A few moments earlier, Thorin had inserted the key, allowing the hidden entrance to open. At last, they had achieved their long-sought objective. Now, they only had to face the final obstacle, the dragon. "All right, Aldril Bilbo, it's your turn," Thorin said, turning to look at both of them, who nodded. A somewhat nervous Bilbo glanced at Aldril beside him, who returned his gaze. "Relax, Bilbo. Just focus on gathering the gold," he said calmly, then with a determined look added, "I'll take care of the dragon." With that, Aldril entered the passage. He didn't admire the architecture like a tourist. There would be time for that if he survived what lay ahead. Now, his entire focus was on how to wound Smaug. He was so focused he didn't even notice when he had descended through the enormous halls filled with gold. But something stood out in these gold-filled halls. There, in the middle of the vast chamber, lay Smaug lazily, resting, deeply asleep. It wasn't until Aldril reached the lower part and stepped on the gold that Smaug opened his eyes, apathetically observing him as though he posed no threat. "Oh," Smaug said curiously, still lying down and observing Aldril without concern. "A human," he mused aloud. "What have you come for?" "To die," he replied lazily. It wasn't until he recalled something that his reptilian brow furrowed. "But how did you get in?" he asked again without getting a response. Not that it mattered to him. He assumed the human was stunned by his magnificence. Yes. A dragon's ego was as grand as the highest mountains. It never crossed his mind that Aldril would face him head-on like a warrior. After all, those brave warriors had long since died. "Oh, it doesn't matter," he finally decided, uninterested in a response. "It's better you tell me why you're here. I'll grant you the honor of speaking before I kill you," he concluded with a mocking tone. Indifferent to Smaug's taunts, Aldril looked at him calmly, feeling a stir of excitement within him, an emotion he quickly suppressed. This thrill had emerged since he was trained by Mjolnir. It was something akin to a yearning to face the strongest. "I am here to challenge you," he finally spoke. Words that to Smaug's disgust sounded so ridiculous that the dragon slowly rose, his resting form shifting, sending cascades of gold clattering below. Smaug's imposing body cast a vast shadow, intimidating to any who might see him. His formidable size told tales of his ancient age. Here, standing before Aldril, was no ordinary dragon, no. Here stood a being who had survived the War of Wrath, where the mighty Calagon had perished at the sword of Arendelle. And now, his great-grandson rose with pride to equal those long-sung feats. "You? A mere human comes to challenge me." Smaug muttered with derision. He couldn't believe it. A mere and wretched human dared to stand before him. How many years had it been since he last saw such a sight? Such scorn might provoke a reckless fool, but was Aldril one of those? Certainly not. Faced with the taunt, he showed no hesitation. His calm state foretold that no matter what Smaug said, he would not back down. "What? Did the dragon eat your tongue?" Smaug shouted, his thunderous laughter shaking the pillars that firmly supported the treasure chamber, a structural marvel of the dwarves. Not even a dragon could shake these foundations. Perhaps Calagon could have, but that dragon had been dead for centuries and posed no threat. "There is no need to speak," Aldril calmly replied, already knowing what awaited him as he drew Angwyril. That sword glowed with a radiance rivaling the moonlight. There it was, that dragon again. The blade longed to slice him once more. Its will, born over the long ages, yearned to face such a creature, and finally, what it had craved was fulfilled. "For between you and me, there is nothing left to say," he concluded. Boom. Smaug's powerful tail moved with unmatched speed. His massive size didn't slow him down. On the contrary, the magic within made him swift. His strike, fast as an arrow, impacted the spot where Aldril had stood. But hadn't Aldril seen it coming? Of course he had. Before Smog could react, a brilliant light darted above his tail, marking each step with a fine line of blood. This sword could cut his scales, rumored to be harder than steel. Arg! A deafening pain filled him. How could a few simple cuts cause such agony? He wondered, though only fleetingly, as he quickly whipped his tail to hurl the glowing figure far away. Yet, as if unaffected by gravity, Aldril's light form landed softly on a set of stairs at the side, his figure gradually revealed. It was then that Smog remembered, that same pain. That very sword. The scent that had reached his nostrils. With a furious roar he bellowed, a cry that shook the dwarves observing the clash from afar. "I recognize that scent!" He roared ferociously at Aldril. You're the son of that cursed elf." "Yes, I am Tindamil's son, Aldril, and I have come to challenge you, Smaug. Today I will claim the feat my mother could not achieve." With that shout, Aldril lunged toward Smog at a remarkable speed. Smog likewise charged toward him, his enormous body shaking the hall with each step, more so as he moved on all four limbs. From afar, the expedition team watched the encounter in awe. They knew Aldril was strong, but this? It was completely unbelievable. They never would have imagined Aldril would be capable of standing up to Smog head-on. "We should help him," Balin said, concerned. Known to hold Aldril in high regard, seeing him face that imposing dragon brought him deep dread, fearing for Aldril's life. With his suggestion came the nodding of the dwarves, who, despite their fear, would not hesitate to aid a friend, especially Aldril. "No, we'd only get in the way," Thorin responded, a sobering truth. "This is a fight we can't interfere in. Aldril is already a monster to be able to face that dragon," he continued. "The monster of the present versus the monster of the past. That fight isn't for us," he concluded, making the dwarves turn back to the distance, where powerful clashes rang out. "Let us pray he can kill that lizard." General POV Bilbo. Boom boom boom, distant thunderous sounds echoed, and the ground beneath his feet wobbled as if it were made of jelly. It was extremely difficult to take a step in this immense chamber filled with gold, compounded by the constant tremors shaking his soul. Aldril was locked in battle with the dragon while he stole all the treasure he could, a task that would be remarkably easy were it not for the continuous quakes and the difficulty of moving through so many gold coins. "What should I take?" he wondered. There were so many treasures that their glow illuminated the room, which should have been shrouded in darkness. However, that dwarven engineering allowed a subtle hint of moonlight or sunlight to filter through tiny holes, imperceptible to the naked eye, letting particles of light reflect off the golden hue of the treasure. "This necklace looks nice," he said, lifting a ruby-laden necklace. "Yes, let's keep this and this." Bilbo wasn't just an ordinary hobbit. No, he was quite skilled at identifying valuable gems, a quality he had acquired as a child. His family was wealthy, so it was natural for him to grow up seeing jewels and gold coins. Besides, our dear Mr. Baggins was humble by nature, which is why so much wealth seemed to him like just a pile of random trinkets. Yes, Bilbo could live with just the essentials and be perfectly happy with them. "Yes, this set of cups would look good in my collection," he said as he picked up a silver teapot, utensils scattered around due to the tremors. But a serious question: why did Bilbo remain calm despite the distant booms? The answer was simple: his unwavering confidence in Aldril. "I will handle the dragon, you handle the gold," he had said. And in Aldril's eyes, Bilbo saw a fierce concentration that was intimidating just to look at. He trusted his friend, yes, his friend. Though his nerves gnawed at him, making his steps unsteady, he had heard the dragon roar in pain, which told him his friend was keeping his promise. If Aldril showed courage by facing the dragon, then I must also remain steady and keep my promise, he had said, which helped our dear hobbit to stay calm. As he inspected his surroundings, a soft, whitish glow caught his attention. There, among the immense piles of gold coins, lay a necklace that shone like a star, with white gems that illuminated his face. "What a beautiful necklace," he murmured before stowing it in Aldril's spatial ring. Yes, Aldril had given him this ring before the battle, so he could gather treasure more quickly and in larger quantities. "I trust you, Bilbo," he had said while handing him the ring. "You're my friend, and I know you won't steal from me," were his final words before they took separate paths. "What else should I take now? Oh, that gem." Whatever he was about to say got stuck in his throat, for he felt an immense attraction to a helm resting atop a mound of gold. Up high lay a helm, with golden bands and a dragon engraved on the crest that caught his attention. With small, nimble steps, he moved through the pile of gold. This helm. A fleeting thought crossed his mind as he held it. Yes, I'm sure Aldril would like this. I'll save it for him. Aldril, as a warrior, he demonstrated unmatched bravery. Only a few in this third age could say they had the will to stand before a dragon, and even more so to confront it. Anyone witnessing this battle would exclaim, "What a brave warrior!" And even more so, if he managed to kill the dragon, he would be acclaimed by all. Songs would be sung of his great feat. He would no longer be in his mother's shadow. But did this matter to Aldril? No, on the contrary, he didn't care about fame. He longed only for experiences, adventures he could later share with his children. He aimed for the highest honor, to be remembered. He didn't want his name to disappear into the mists of time. He wanted to be remembered. As King Leonidas once told Dilios before he died, "Remember us." He didn't desire monuments or songs, just one simple thing, to be remembered. And now, he was fulfilling that purpose. He had gone on a grand adventure with the dwarves, and now he would achieve his set goal, slay this dragon and be remembered as the one who killed the largest dragon of this age. Just as Arendelle was remembered. Boom! The enormous, scaly tail crashed into yet another pillar. This was beginning to annoy him. This place was no fit for him. These pillars gave far too much cover to the human elf. His massive size allowed that cursed rat to harm him little by little. "Stop hiding like a cursed rat," he roared in frustration, only to receive a cut to his belly that made him roar in pain. The wound on his belly alarmed him. Now he remembered that this sword was capable of cutting through his tough scales, so tough that a special alloy had been created just to penetrate one of them. Now this sword, forged in Gondolin, demonstrated that in ancient times, the elves were superior to the dwarves in weapon crafting. His body began to heat up, and a flickering reddish light glowed on his wounded belly. Aldril noticed this and quickly moved with agility toward a column, a natural reaction to the move Smaug was planning to make. That flickering light on his belly was a clear sign that the dragon's fiery breath was coming, a fire so hot that it instantly melted the gold coins in its path. Even the pillar where Aldril hid was visibly heated, the stone turning a vibrant red as if it were a piece of metal fresh from the furnace. The fire spread to the sides, passing like embers. Smaug delighted in this sight, hoping that foolish human would suffer from the heat of his flames. But now, with his anger subsiding, he wondered, why had he come until now? That elf had hurt him, yes, and he wanted revenge on her, and what better way than to kill her son? But still, he had noticed this young man wasn't as strong as that woman. He had inflicted wounds, from which he could easily recover. His initial arrogance returned, and he didn't take him too seriously. He knew he could kill him, but not here. He had to be smart and lure him to a more open area. These dragons bred by Morgoth were intelligent. They weren't idiots. Their arrogance and bad temper would be their only flaws. A plan took shape in his mind. He had to distract and deceive him. Once his fire stopped spreading, he asked with his majestic voice resonating through the hall's echo. "Tell me, boy, why have you really come?" he said. "I smell dwarves and men. Don't tell me they're paying you to kill me," he mocked. Why is he talking now? A distraction to make me lower my guard. Aldril wondered, still staying alert. In the reflection of his sword, he watched Smaug's movements. He wouldn't be foolish enough to run out now. His silence was the sign Smaug was waiting for, and he continued talking to distract him. "So, I'm right. But are you sure they'll pay you? Dwarves and men are usually greedy. If you manage the feat of killing me," he sneered, "I'm sure you won't come out unscathed. They'll take advantage and stab you in the back to avoid paying you anything." "What are you talking about?" Aldril said out loud, still hidden by the pillar. "I came without needing a contract," he lied, not wanting to give Smaug the satisfaction of being right about being hired to kill him. "Don't lie." Smaug roared. "I recognize the smell of humans from that lake town. Now." It was then that he felt it. The countless years he had spent with this treasure had allowed him to imbue it with his magic. He knew every ounce of this vast hoard, and now he felt it. He'd been robbed. Now he understood. The elf's son was only a distraction. Those filthy dwarves and humans were stealing his gold. To him, Aldril had both the scent of dwarves and humans. "Thieves!" he bellowed in fury. He no longer cared about Aldril. He turned around and moved at great speed in the direction where he sensed his treasures disappearing. "As if I'd let you," Aldril muttered, running. His speed couldn't be compared to human standards. His heightened attributes and physical training with Mjolnir had allowed him to reach a speed equal to or even greater than Smaug's. Don't be fooled by Smaug's great size. He was a dragon. A creature of magic. Though dark, it was said that before being corrupted by Morgoth, the creatures from which dragons descend were spirits just below the mayor. Because of this, despite the corruption, they retained some of their original power, and that magic allowed Smaug to be swift and agile despite his great size. Bilbo, our little hobbit, was stretching out his tiny hand. His objective? A shining stone from which different colors danced like a folkloric dance. Its colors combined with each movement, a gem that enchanted the usually indifferent hobbit. But it wasn't for this reason he was trying to get it. On the contrary, he had recognized it. The heart of the mountain, a brilliant gem greatly beloved by Thorin Oakenshield. This gem was a family relic, and eager to have it back in his hands, Thorin had told him to search for it with vigor. Boom, 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 heavy footsteps echoed in the distance, so heavy they caused the stone to fall into Bilbo's hands. "Finally!" he exclaimed with joy. He hadn't noticed the footsteps had ceased. When he turned around, he came face to face with the dragon's snout. It was at that moment that he felt terror. His body trembled, his eyes opened wide in disbelief, and cold sweat ran down his body. "I'm dead," was the thought that crossed his mind, for Smaug was enraged. This time he wouldn't speak. He'd go straight for the kill and murder the thief. It was a sure death sentence for anyone daring to steal a dragon's treasure. "Filthy thief," he said furiously, lifting his head as fire accumulated, ready to fry this dirty thief. Oh, how he would enjoy burning him to ashes. Instinctively, Bilbo took a step back, watching with dread as the dragon gathered his fire. Why did I accept this task, he wondered, now fully realizing the danger. Even Aldril would have a hard time against a dragon. Boom, the expected flame didn't come. Instead, Smaug had stopped building up his fire, as Aldril had arrived just in time. With a thunderous leap, he lunged towards Smaug's head, making a Witcher sign with his hands. A telekinetic wave struck Smaug's face, causing his head, once raised high, to crash down, hitting the piles of gold. It was an effective blow, and the dragon was repelled for a few seconds, enough time for Aldril to look at Bilbo and shout, "Get out of here." Without a word, the hobbit ran toward the entrance, occasionally looking back, only to see his friend standing fearlessly before the figure rising bit by bit. "I'm sick of you, cursed child." "General POV, I was planning to make you my appetizer," Smaug bellowed furiously, "but now you'll be my first meal. After you, I'll hunt down those cursed dwarves and humans." His palpable rage echoed in every word, as if the inhabitants of Middle-earth had forgotten just how fearsome he was. The mighty Smaug would have to remind them that they should fear a dragon. With nowhere to hide, Aldril had only the nearby mountains of gold for cover. However, taking shelter there would be foolish. Smaug's flames were hot enough to melt the gold, and if Aldril hid, he risked burning in the molten metal. Smaug doubted the boy would be stupid enough to take that chance. But, oh, what a surprise awaited him. Smaug released a burst of his accumulated fire breath, and a wave of heat illuminated the dim hall. Against all odds, Aldril slid over the mountain of gold, adrenaline pumping. Behind him, the gold cascaded like a river of molten metal. If he were caught by that molten gold, he would not only be trapped but likely killed. He wasn't foolish, he wasn't a dragon, able to withstand such heat. Reaching the bottom of the golden mountain, Aldril quickly gripped Anguirel. With the agility of a warg, he turned and sprinted toward the towering dragon, who continued pouring flames on the same spot, oblivious to Aldril's subtle movements. His weak points are the wings. They'll keep him from flying if you strike there. Take advantage of it. Glorfindel's advice echoed in his mind, the elf's voice resonating in his subconscious. With a leap that defied logic for a human, Aldril delivered a powerful slash to the scales near Smaug's wing, making a deep cut that tore off several scales. A priceless treasure by itself, yet ignored by Aldril as he rebounded from Smog's wing like a spring. Bam! Aff! You cursed rat! Smog roared in pain. Fearing Aldril would cut his wing membrane, which allowed him to fly, Smog summoned all his strength, slamming his wing against the nearest pillar. That cut had wounded him. How dare this little boy harm him? And all because of that damned sword. Otherwise, he would have paid no heed to any cuts. Countless warriors had tried to pierce his scales, but only 2 had succeeded in wounding him, and now there was a third. The small figure fell among the gold coins. Smog wasted no time. His open jaws lunged straight toward the tiny figure. If he couldn't burn him, he would eat him. But his massive jaws found no taste of flesh, only the bland metallic taste of gold filled his enormous mouth. Blah! Where's the little rat? He spat out the gold in disgust, indignant at failing to capture the small human elf. Where are you, cursed rat? Hiding in your hole? He sneered, his tone laced with mockery and frustration. Sniffing the air, he caught Aldril's scent. Ugh! The familiar scent of an elf filled his nostrils. Despite his disgust, he had located Aldril's position, but in his cunning he planned to feign ignorance, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Where could you be? No anger laced his words. Why? The answer was simple. Smog was arrogant by nature, and with victory seemingly near, he felt no problem in toying with the little mouse. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed a silver glint hidden behind a pillar. There you are, he thought with a smirk. His tail slowly rose into the air, positioning itself at an angle difficult to see. Then, like lightning, it slammed into Aldril's location with a loud crash. Damn it! Aldril shouted, narrowly evading the attack, leaping back with an aerial maneuver that twisted his body mid-air. It was a risky but necessary move. However, Smog seized this opportunity, swiping a powerful clawed hand at Aldril, sending him flying through the air and crashing into a mound of gold. Well, there you are. Smog taunted arrogantly. The little rat can't hide anymore, he said, striding slowly toward Aldril, who was painfully getting to his feet. Despite the pain, Aldril rose with a groan. Some ribs were broken, but it didn't matter. The elven stone in his chest was the key. His ribs cracked as they set back into place, the stone's magic healing them. I have to be more careful, he thought as he stood up again. Smog loomed before him, towering with arrogance and mockery, believing he'd already won. Aldril's slow movements hinted that he was severely wounded. Be grateful, he said arrogantly. Only 2 people have ever managed to wound me, now you're the third and the last. His jaws opened, flames gathering inside as he prepared to deliver the final blow. The dragon will let his guard down if he thinks the fight is won, Glorfindel's words echoed in Aldril's mind. Take advantage of that moment and strike with all your might. Deal him a blow so powerful that it turns the tide in your favor. Smog lowered his jaws, bringing them close to Aldril, ready to grant him the luxury of being burned. He would have preferred to devour him, but the humans of that town would be treated to that fate. For now, he wanted to see this one writhe in agony as he was scorched. But how naive he was. Aldril had formed a sign with his fingers, and as Smog lowered his jaws, he seized his chance. With the Witcher's sign, he created a wave that surged outward. Boom! Ang! The telekinetic blast interrupted Smog's flames, causing him to recoil. Aldril seized this brief moment, mustering all his strength to sprint toward the dragon. His energy, slightly restored by the elven stone, allowed him a burst of speed. He leaped, touching Smog's head with one foot, using it to propel himself into the air. Anguirel shone brightly, briefly blinding Smog as Aldril descended with the full force of gravity, ready to strike. A powerful downward slash towards Smog's head. Dormant instincts jolted to life in the dragon, warning him, if you don't dodge this strike, you might die. Instinct drove him to pull back as fast as he could, tucking his head to evade. Slash. He dodged the blow, but at what cost? Arg, you vile insect. His eye, the dragon's vulnerable spot that let him gaze upon his prey as mere insects, had been cut. A line traced across his eyelid. Though he had shut his eye reflexively, it was useless against the gondolin-forged steel. Blood pooled from the wound. Smog's head thrashed feverishly, like a serpent with something lodged in its snout, whipping from side to side, overcome by a pain so intense it clouded his thoughts. Not even that elf had inflicted such an injury. Now he was blind in one eye. Poor Smog howled in agony, a cry that could burst eardrums. "Ah, it hurts! It hurts!" He bellowed, attempting to quell the pain by slamming into nearby pillars. His arrogance had cost him an eye. But how could he have known? How could he have foreseen that this insignificant creature would hurt him so deeply? Aldril might not have his mother's strength, but he had something she lacked, the patience to seize the right opportunity. His strength was growing, slowly but surely. Blinded by fury, Smog abandoned his fight with Aldril. Enduring the pain, he turned and ran toward the exit. He had to flee. Memories of fear from years ago surfaced. His diamond-hard scales were useless against a sword forged in Gondolin. He had to escape. "I will have my revenge. I will have my revenge," he screamed aloud. "If I can't kill you, I'll kill those wretched humans," he bellowed, rage-blind, racing toward the exit. His wings unfurled, breaking through nearby walls. "No, you won't," Aldril shouted, chasing after Smog, managing to grab hold of his tail and slowly climbing up. The pain was so intense that Smog didn't notice Aldril scaling his tail. Countless chambers blurred by as Aldril climbed. The speed of Smog's movements made it hard to ascend quickly, and at some point, Smog took to the air. The ascent grew more difficult for Aldril, who clung tightly to the dragon's tail spikes. Anguirel had slipped from his grasp during the climb, but it didn't matter. Anguirel would return to him, a quality granted by Varda, copied from Tuur's axe, which would always find its way back, a blessing given by Ulmo. He held on with all his strength as the wind battered him, finally pausing when Smog landed at the entrance to Erebor. The entrance, blocked by a pile of rocks, was easily scattered by Smog's massive size, sending debris flying. Small bits of gravel pelted Aldril's head. With a roar, Smog burst out. The dreaded beast of legend had returned to the surface. His presence signified nothing but destruction and death. "I will have my revenge," he roared, his thundering voice echoing across the distance, proclaiming his return to all. "I am fire. I am death." General Boom! A thunderous noise reached the ears of the dwarves, who were hiding like cockroaches. They had seen the terrifying Smog firsthand, and witnessing Aldril's brave fight had stirred their spirits, only to be dampened again by Smog's fury. They weren't foolish. They lacked Aldril's speed and agility, and would only be a hindrance if they tried to help him, or so the elder dwarves thought. "To the casting molds. We need to lead him there and fill it with molten metal," Keely suggested impatiently. "We can't let him fight alone. He'll be killed if we don't help," he said. "Yes, we can use the furnaces. Come on, we have to get there and heat them up ahead of time." Philly agreed, sharing his brother's eagerness to help Aldril. The bravery displayed had inspired their youthful spirits. Nori, one of the younger dwarves, agreed as well. "Yes. You go and I'll warn Aldril," he said, his spirit still aflame despite his fear. "I'll help lead the dragon." "Hurry!" he shouted as he tried to descend the stairs, only to be stopped by a firm hand. "You will go nowhere," Thorin said calmly, though this time he couldn't hide the look of madness in his eyes. They all saw it, the great king under the mountain. He was displaying the same signs of madness as his grandfather, Thror. The sight made those who saw it grow pale. "Thorin," murmured Balin with deep sorrow. What he had feared most had happened. Their great king, worthy of following, also harbored the seed of madness within him. All because of that cursed treasure, he thought in resignation. "Why are you stopping us, uncle?" Keely asked, hesitant. Thorin's face was less than normal. They had all heard of the madness rooted in Durrant's line, starting back when they were driven from Moria. Durrant's bane, everything began there. They didn't know what it was, but Durrant's legacy had not been the same since that day. Summoning courage, Philly stood by his brother. "Yes, uncle, what's going on? Don't you want to help Aldril?" he asked. His persistent questions echoed through the company. Yes, why not help him? They might be a hindrance to Aldril if they were at his side, but not if they managed to attack the dragon from outside. But how would Thorin Oakenshield in his madness allow this? And no, he shouted. That half-elf will deal with him. If he dies, it is no concern of ours. Such words left the company speechless. Their king was beginning to sink into madness. And they weren't far from the truth. Thorin had been well enough, but when he descended through the halls of Erebor and beheld his family's vast treasure, that rooted madness had awakened. Thorin, murmured Gloin. Are we really not going to help Aldril? He asked softly, not wanting to lose another friend, but also fearing being seen as a traitor in Thorin's eyes and branded a rebel. Such was the way of these dwarves. Any other would blindly follow the king's orders. If he says it's his matter, then we shouldn't interfere, was what most dwarves would say. But this expedition group was different. They would never leave a friend behind, and they would do what they could to change their king's mind to save one more life. It's my final decision. We will not help him. Thorin replied, causing the dwarves to lower their heads in disappointment. But if he loses, the dragon will still be there, and he won't let us reclaim Erebor, Thorin. In the silence that followed, an aged voice made itself heard. Balin, as the dwarf closest to Thorin, gave a valid reason to help Aldril. Just then, Bilbo arrived, running toward them with a shout of joy. Smaug is retreating. I saw Aldril hanging from his tail. He's driven the dragon off. The elation on his face was unmistakable. His friend had done it. He had witnessed a battle worthy of storybooks, and the spectacle inspired him. He would surely begin a book of his adventures once back in the Shire, and that battle between man-elf and dragon would be recorded in history. In that case, there's no need to think of foolishness. Thorin began, only to be interrupted by a loud crash and a voice that froze them in place. The voice echoed through the desolate valley. I am fire. I am death. That proclamation filled them with terror. That voice was fearsome. Look there. Bilbo managed to exclaim. In the distance, a figure flew toward Lake Town. Smaug had left Erebor. The townspeople. They'll die, cried Bilbo in fear. That is no longer our concern, Mr. Baggins, said Thorin with disdain, prompting Bilbo to stare at him, wide-eyed. Now they can deal with the dragon, he continued, an unpleasant smile forming on his face. That treasure awaits us. Onward. With that, he ignored the dwarves' downcast expressions and descended the stairs. Lake Town laughter, songs, food, and drink filled the air. A lively celebration was underway. And why wouldn't they celebrate? These people had suffered from lack of food and money, all thanks to that greedy, obese governor. But tonight, their troubles were forgotten. A group of dwarves had arrived, one of them claiming to be the king under the mountain, promising gold in exchange for aid. Such an opportunity was not wasted by the fat governor, who, basking in his luxuries, flaunted that food was not scarce, it was merely well guarded in his vaults. What a despicable man, the townsfolk would say, if not for the fact that they were now feasting. It was late into the night. The moon hung high above, and the stars shone brilliantly. Naturally, many took advantage of such a setting. Some stayed up until the early hours still celebrating. Others admired the stars, while some followed the elves. How foolish, missing this celebration over the whims of those elves, they'd say. Amid this celebration, a small commotion was taking place. Alfred, taking advantage of the situation, went to find Bard. He, along with a group of guards, headed to Bard's home, only to find him gazing at the great mountain. Oh, but it's Bard, he exclaimed with feigned surprise. Taking one last look at the great mountain, he sneered. No, I fear the dragon might come and attack us by surprise, Bard replied, unfazed by Alfred's mockery. His bow hung from his shoulder, a black arrow clutched tightly in his right hand, as if it were his last hope. Nonsense, one of the guards scoffed. Just children's tales, added another. It seems our dear Bard believes in fairy tales, Alfred sneered, reveling in making Bard look foolish. They aren't tales, Alfred, Bard replied calmly, before frowning and readying his bow. He shouted, hurry. Evacuate the people. Without waiting, he ran. Follow me. We must protect the people, even at the cost of our lives. This action took them by surprise. Alfred hadn't reacted. He quickly snapped out of his stupor and with a grotesque look shouted, "Chase him!" The guards immediately ran after Bard. What was he thinking? Did he really think I'd believe his tales? He muttered, turning around, only to be stunned by a guard's scream. Dragun! Aldril versus Smog. The wind whipped across Aldril's face as he clung with all his strength to Smog's tail. It seemed the beast hadn't noticed him yet, as it hadn't made any moves to shake him off. The dragon's spine served as handholds, allowing him to inch his way up towards Smog's back. It wasn't until he reached the dragon's back that Smog noticed the filthy half-human, half-elf. The pain of his wound had dulled his senses. "You're worse than a cursed rat," he roared, beating his wings and maneuvering his massive body, flipping upside down in an attempt to dislodge the pest clinging to his back. But Aldril was no ordinary person. His formidable strength and endurance allowed him to hold onto Smog's spines. "Arg!" he grunted with effort. It was no easy task to stay latched on with the wind tearing at him, but despite the struggle, he managed to inch closer. He had to reach the dragon's head. In the center of the horns, that's where you can kill them with a single strike, Glorfindel's voice echoed in his mind. You wield the most powerful blades in Middle-earth. It will be easy for you to pierce its tough scales. I have to get there, he told himself as he climbed further up Smog's body. Furious at failing to rid himself of this plague, Smog dived straight down, the wind roaring like a fierce gale around him, his wings folded tightly, diving like a hawk. His goal? To crash into the lake and, if possible, shake off the pest. Such an impact would injure any other dragon, but not him. He was the mighty Smog, and his magic allowed him to perform such maneuvers unharmed. The lake approached rapidly. Aldril's eyes were half closed, the strong wind making it impossible to fully open them. He had guessed Smog's intentions. With all his strength, he gripped the spines on Smog's back, bracing himself for the impact. Boom! The powerful crash into the lake sent waves rippling toward Lake Town, waves that swallowed parts of the city. Some unfortunate souls were swept away, thrown into the frigid lake. Darkness was all Aldril saw. The impact had jolted him, and he used every ounce of his strength to hold on, barely managing to stay on Smog's back. He opened his eyes, seeing only the small red patch of Smog's scale mere inches away. One of his swords was left behind in Erebor, and he knew he could summon it with a thought, but it would take a few minutes to return. Taking advantage of Smog's drastically reduced speed, he drew Anglical, the blade that had slain the first dragon Glorung. With all his remaining strength, he plunged it into Smog's back, causing the dragon, who was swimming slowly toward the surface, to scream in pain beneath the water. Roar! Water spiraled into the dragon's mouth, forcing him to open his eyes in terror and desperation. Poor Smog. The sky was the domain of dragons, but not the water. Underneath, they were slow. With all his might, he rose, his wings beating furiously. In Lake Town, Bard and a group of guards were rescuing people after the massive wave. What a wave it was! Most of the city had suffered from the disaster, and Bard's face bore a grave expression. "Hurry!" he urged. It was then that he observed, in awe, the massive silhouette of the dragon emerging from the lake, rising back into the air. Those red scales were unmistakable. "Smog," he murmured. The dragon had taken flight again, drops of blood trailing from his body and staining the lake. Is he wounded? Bard wondered in disbelief, only to spot a figure driving a sword into the dragon's back. Is that Aldril? General POV, Aldril versus Smog. The ascent was an extremely uncomfortable sensation, like a roller coaster rising rapidly without letting you hold on. His strength was waning. The impact and sudden rise had prevented him from fully reacting. As Smog ascended, one of his arms slipped off the spine he clung to, and the water running down didn't help his grip at all. "Damn it," he muttered as he dangled from one arm on the spine. Falling from this height would result in severe injuries, or worse, death, a gamble he wasn't willing to take. With a grunt, he stretched out his hanging arm, fighting against the wind that battered him, making his action difficult. Ah! With a shout, his arm reached its target. His feet dangled as he clung tightly to Smog's spine. Smog, his vision blurred, couldn't see exactly where Aldril was, but he could feel he hadn't rid himself of his foe. Ag! A growl was the only way he could show his frustration and disdain. His powerful build and magic allowed him to ascend close to the edge of the stratosphere, his limit, one he could only reach due to the growing magic accumulated over the long years since the War of Wrath, where almost all of his kin were annihilated. This was his last trump card. It would have been easier to try and slam into his back to shake off this pest. But no. He was Smaug. He was the Red Terror, one of the oldest and largest dragons still alive. He had to demonstrate his grandeur, and what better way than putting on a spectacle for the foolish beings who had forgotten his majesty. The air was thin, and it was a miracle he didn't pass out from the sudden change in pressure, a miracle thanks to his new attributes and the blessing inherited from Valavarda, which allowed him to remain conscious. From this height, he could glimpse some of Middle-earth's grandeur, but there was no time to admire it as the dragon prepared for the inevitable descent. His wings spread with unmatched grace. His ascending figure paused for a few seconds as if time itself had stopped. He remained in that position briefly, then retracted his wings and began a steep dive once more. "Try to handle this, you damned rat," he roared. This time, Smaug had reached his limit, and logically, the dive was even more devastating. The very air seemed to burn, warning of a terrible impact. Aldril felt the hot wind cutting his face, pushing him backward, and his wet clothes dried at an astonishing rate. It was as if a meteor were falling upon Middle-earth once again. A divine descent, some would later say of those who witnessed the event. It was a spectacle worthy of sight, one that many inhabitants of Middle-earth could see. Iron Hills, fire. "Fire is falling from the sky, my lord," a soldier informed Dane II, better known as Dane Ironfoot. Upon hearing this, he rushed to the open terrace of the mountain, catching sight of the spectacular scene, a ball of fire plummeting down. "That direction is Erebor," he murmured with a furrowed brow. "Thorin," he said quietly, concern in his voice. Kingdom of Gondor, the steward of Gondor, Turgon, was also informed by a servant, who exclaimed, "Something is falling from the sky, my lord. It's a ball of fire." This brought great concern to Turgon, an elderly man of 86 years. Despite his age, he quickly left the royal chamber and went to the garden where the white tree stood. From there he could see, with great concern, a ball of fire descending. From that distance, it appeared to fall slowly, though it was only a matter of perspective. "Father, father." His son, Ecthelion II, who would succeed him one day, rushed into the royal garden, sweat on his face indicating he had been running for a while. "Do you see it, father?" "What is that?" he asked. Little was known about meteors, as only two had fallen on Middle-earth in recorded history. One disintegrated, and the other endured, from which materials were taken to forge anguirol and anglicol. "I don't know, my son," Turgon replied in his aged voice. "But I hope it's not a bad omen," he concluded, his gaze fixed toward the northwest. "There lies the lonely mountain," murmured Thengel, one of Turgon's servants and the son of Fengel, the current king of Rohan, a murmur barely heard. Rohan, the elderly King Fengel of Rohan, gazed northwest, lost in thought. There was no need to alert him, as he had witnessed the memorable event during his walk. "The day something descended from the sky" would be a fitting title. His years of experience allowed him to stay calm, while his guards looked on, horrified by the sight. Lothlorien Silborn lay in the mystical tree where his home resided, his gaze fixed on the magnificent scene. Beside him, Galadriel watched with an unusually serious expression, which puzzled him. "What troubles you, my love?" he asked tenderly, looking at her calmly. "I fear for that child," she said in her magnetic voice. "His journey has only begun. The dangers he will face would make even the bravest elf turn back, and this is just the beginning." She had already noticed. The descending ball of fire was the dragon, and with him was Aldril, both falling like a divine sign. Rivendell, both Elrond and Glorfindel stood atop a tower, looking toward Erebor, and logically they observed Smaug's figure plummeting like a meteor. Yet, neither showed any signs of concern. "It seems the beginning of your nephew's legend has arrived," Glorfindel said with ease. From the moment he met Aldril, he had recognized the child's enormous potential, capable of surpassing them. Nodding at Glorfindel's words, Elrond didn't take his eyes off the scene. "Yes, now this era will belong to the new generation. We, who are from the old age, have nothing left to do. The future of Middle-earth now rests in their hands," he said, glancing over to Aragorn, who stood with his daughter Arwen. Lake Town. The citizens who managed to escape the initial wave watched with feverish fear at the descending figure, knowing that if it hit the lake, it would spell disaster for the town. "Hurry! Leave the boats and go to the tallest building," Bard shouted to the crowd, who had only moments ago been rushing to board the boats to leave Lake Town. They regretted not heeding his warnings sooner. How foolish they were. The dragon wasn't just a story, and now they were paying the price for their ignorance. On Smaug's back, Aldril held on with all his strength. The air burned his hands, but he endured the searing pain. He had never imagined something like this would happen. Smaug had shown no such abilities. He had been naive once again, but now he had to survive at any cost. "I won't die here," he thought as he clung to Smaug. Magically, his coat did not catch fire. However, it was unfortunate that his bow and arrows had burned away during Smaug's descent. This felt like a meteor crashing, a sensation filled with adrenaline. The lake grew closer with each passing second. Aldril couldn't see it due to the fiery aura surrounding him, but instinctively, he knew he had to do something, or his life would truly be in danger. Despite his burned hands, he managed to make a sign with one of his fingers, casting a protective shield learned from a wizard's teachings. Smaug, like a meteor, plunged toward the lake, a movement that in his eyes was full of glory and grandeur. Aldril would be worthy of dying to such a move. Smaug knew the lake was deep, so he had no concern about his massive body entering at such speed. In those final moments before impact, everyone around was petrified. All sound vanished. In the distance, Thalwyn, along with Finduilas, Legolas, and Toriel, watched in horror. This went far beyond anything they could have imagined. Thalwyn and Finduilas were the most affected. In all their years, they had never seen such an impactful sight. At some point, Thranduil had appeared beside them, and the scene reminded him of the War of Wrath, when fire and death flooded all of Middle-earth. He remembered seeing fireballs fall from the sky, dragons making their final attack before dying. He remembered how many of his comrades had perished, taken to their graves by dragons. There was only silence. Those seconds felt eternal. The refugee's skin prickled with fear. In that moment, the silence was shattered by a thunderous crash that deafened everyone for miles. The shockwave from the impact caused many to fall, and others, weaker, had their eardrums burst. "Waia!" Aldril's scream echoed across the vastness. None could tell if it was a cry of pain or the desperate shout of someone clinging to life with all their might. Yet that thunderous scream was drowned by the explosion from the impact. Boom! The lake was shaken by the immense force, and torrential water sprayed out like rain. The intense heat immediately caused the water to evaporate, creating a haunting fog. Amidst the refugees' groans of pain, a broken whisper echoed among those nearby, a whisper loaded with conflicting emotions. "Aldril, please don't die." General POV, Aldril, darkness. Only darkness flooded his vision. What human, elf, or dwarf could withstand such an impact? He was no exception. It was a miracle, granted by his attributes and the blessing of Avala, that he managed to stay conscious. His arms, scorched like charcoal, were now useless, his chest ached, and his breath stalled. It wasn't as if he could breathe underwater, but his strong constitution allowed him to stay beneath the surface for at least an hour, even surpassing the dolphins. He couldn't hear a single sound at the bottom of the lake. "Is this how it ends?" he thought as the depths of the lake slowly claimed him. Ah! It was fun. An unconscious smile formed on his face. He regretted nothing, though perhaps he'd be disappointed for not living up to others' expectations. But what could he do? His burnt arms were useless, his broken ribs pressed inward, and blood was draining from his body, diluted by the lake's water. He was weak, extremely weak. His blurry eyes could barely make out the figure of Smaug. The dragon had not escaped unscathed. In his arrogance, he thought he could endure the impact, but even his magic hadn't shielded him entirely from the damage. Part of his left wing was broken, caused by the friction of the impact. Dazed and floating like a mass of wood, the dragon was stunned by the collision. His eyes lazily moved in Aldril's direction, glaring at him with hate and a touch of satisfaction, watching as his figure slowly disappeared into the dark depths of the lake. "Be honored," he heard the dragon's voice below the water. "You will die by my hand. the greatest and most powerful dragon of this age. Smaug said, then thrashed and left the lake's bottom, believing he'd emerge victorious. Now he would only need to strike against those greedy humans. He would remind them that dragons were not to be trifled with. What frustration, Aldril thought as he watched Smaug ascend. He could only look on helplessly, having failed Bomber and all those who believed in him. He closed his eyes, the only sound left being that of water filling his ears. He could do nothing now. However, a faint moonlight illuminated his face, and the deafening pain had disappeared. He felt the gentle whisper of the wind on his face, urging him to open his eyes. Slowly, he did so. A vast meadow filled his vision, trees and flowers around him bringing a sense of peace and security. The soft moonlight touched his skin, giving him a feeling of comfort. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes, the fresh air filling his nostrils. He didn't understand where he was, but it seemed to be his mental landscape, only this place was different from where he usually trained. This space felt as though nature itself had demonstrated its architectural power, a place where he could rest. Yet the intoxicating silence was broken by soft footsteps behind him. Puzzled, he turned around to face the owner of those steps. Upon seeing that figure, he froze, his pupils dilated. Just the hair of that person had blinded him. He couldn't describe the magnificence and beauty that lay before him. It seems we finally meet. Laketown, Smaug cries and wails echoed through Laketown. Houses collapsed from the waves caused by smog, with many drowned, missing, or buried under the sea of rubble from ruined homes. The long-standing town had slowly succumbed. Brave guards and civilians hurried to help. Who led them? Of course, it was Bard, showing courage as he stayed to aid those in need. The governor? Where is the governor? Voices of those loyal to that obese man kept echoing, hopeful that the person they dedicated their loyalty to would come to their rescue. But nothing could be further from the truth. The governor had already been hiding in his mansion for some time. Being one of the few buildings made from the best would have allowed it to withstand the two waves that struck like a furious tsunami. The governor lay hidden there like a rat, alongside his cowardly follower. "My lord, we must evacuate," said Alfred in fear. "Let's go to the elves. Surely they are taking care of those who left early." "Yes, you're right," replied the governor, curled up under a table in fear. Beside him, several guards were also hiding, a sight that caused the governor to bellow in fury despite the situation. "What are you waiting for? Help me pack all my treasures. We must get out of here." "But sir, we can't abandon our people to their fate," protested one of the guards. Despite his position, he was one of those who fervently opposed the governor. He feared nothing for his family, for they were already safe in the refuge provided by the elves. "I don't care," the governor spat, fury and urgency in his voice. "If you want to stay here and die, stay." Outside in the city, Bard was giving instructions and helping those who still lingered despite his warnings. The mist, created from the steam that rose when water struck the fire from Smaug's fall, slowed down their efforts. Just minutes ago, the dragon had fallen. Bard hoped it had died from the fierce impact. "Hurry up," he shouted, helping a woman out of the cold lake. "Anyone with strength, help." With each hurried step, he assisted in clearing debris or helping people out of the lake. It was a profoundly tragic sight to him. Babies, children, women, and men, all lay as corpses with no distinction. This city was destined for disaster. It was fortunate that more lives were saved, because there was not as much fire as he had feared. Bard the fool. That thought seemed a cruel irony, for as he lifted the corpse of a child, the lake rippled violently, causing instability on the rotting bridges that miraculously still held. The rippling grew more intense. Those nearby looked on in fear and horror at the sight of a reptilian head emerging, one eye closed with a visible reddish scar. The fire had burned and partially sealed the wound. His red scales were an omen of death. "It hurts!" the dragon roared as he used his broken wing to support himself on the bridge that connected to the shore. This bridge was the city's only link to the mainland. Many were running across it, trying to escape the city, but now they had no way out. The bridge was being overtaken by the dragon, who, with difficulty, positioned himself upon it. The massive wooden structure, a gift from the realm of Mirkwood, miraculously bore his weight. Despite the pain, Smog straightened himself, his face a blend of agony and ecstasy. He had won. He had avenged himself on that elf by killing her son. What better way to celebrate than by burning these greedy humans? Soon, he would go after the dwarves once he finished here. A mocking smile appeared as he looked at the scene before him. "It seems you greedy wretches wish to flee from me," he said to the terrified people frozen in fear. "Who gave you permission to run?" With a growl, Smog raised his head high, a spark igniting in his chest. Slowly, a red light began to grow. The dragon's fire had come. His open jaws unleashed a torrent of flames that burned everything in its path. Smog took pleasure in watching some fools turn to ashes in an instant. "Prepare yourselves. Defend the city." Bard shouted from atop a house in the distance, watching in frustration as the dragon burned many civilians attempting to escape over the bridge, a horrifying sight that made him clench his fists in anger. "Prepare yourselves. Bows. Do not fear." The guards shouted. If they had seen anything, it was that the dragon was injured, and with no other way out, if they wanted to survive, they had to fight. "Fire!" One of them yelled, and immediately, those brave enough to face the dragon launched a hail of arrows. Smog looked on with amusement. How could mere arrows harm him? He didn't resist, allowing them to strike his diamond-hard scales. Once the arrows ceased, Smog straightened proudly. He couldn't fly, one of his wings was broken, but that didn't stop him from charging at them and devouring them with his enormous jaws. His fire would annihilate anything in his way. Smog rushed toward them, their cries, wails, and screams becoming louder, mostly from the women who had stayed in Lake Town out of recklessness. Bard watched with horror and rage. He quickly took the black arrow strapped to his back. He needed a perfect angle. This was his only chance. He couldn't waste it, or everything would be lost. In the distance, Smog had begun to burn down the remaining houses still standing. Hell had arrived for the survivors on shore. Every step Smog took brought death, his tail sweeping away the houses around him, and the unstoppable fire spread across the lake. The boats meant for escape were overcrowded, many were lost to the flooding, and the few that remained were filled with women and children. The men, showing bravery, allowed the women and children to leave the city while they stayed behind as distractions. Smog noticed this but didn't care. To him, it was amusing, mere worms trying to flee from him. What a joke. Perhaps he'd let them go just to hunt them down later, or even leave them stranded in the middle of the lake, waiting for them to die of hunger. How fun that would be. It was at that moment of contemplation that he saw it, a boat filled with gold. Dragons were, by nature, greedy, a trait even Morgoth couldn't remove. Seeing this boat of treasure stirred Smog's avarice. He ignored the screaming worms around him, fixated on that barge laden with riches. This was something that the brave warrior bard seized upon. He did not fear the dragon. His children were safe. If anything happened to him, his son would take care of his two siblings. He had to settle the score with the dragon. Throughout the approach, he tried to stay out of Smog's sight and aimed for a precise shot that could pierce through his hard scales. The opportunity had come. At least that obese governor had served a purpose. Watching Smog advance with power in each step, Bard placed his black arrow in his bow. He drew the bowstring and waited for the dragon to be still. It didn't take long. Smog had come right up to the governor's barge. On it, the fat governor was trembling like jelly. The guards had abandoned him long ago, throwing themselves into the lake, which now burned from the dragon's flames. "Where are you taking my treasures?" Smog asked with amusement, his imposing figure enhanced by the flames surrounding him. "Oh, mighty Smog, this is an offering to you and your greatness," said the governor, the only thing he could think of, flattering the dragon in the hope that he might spare his life. It seemed to work, as Smog let out a thunderous laugh. "Good, at least a worm like you knows his place," he said as he lowered his head. The governor was terrified as the dragon now looked at him up close, only inches away. He could feel Smog's stench and the hot air escaping from his nostrils. Hiss. Bard took advantage of this distraction, firing the black arrow from a distance, aiming for Smog's unprotected eye. He hoped the arrow would pierce through the eye and lodge in his brain, killing the dragon. How naive he was. Smog had been fully alert since his battle with Aldril. Had it been the old Smog, this arrow would have struck him, possibly killing him. But not this Smog. His instincts told him to move quickly, and he did, raising his head just in time to narrowly avoid the arrow. With fury, he looked in the direction from which the black arrow had come. He recognized it. They were dangerous to him. He had to kill the one who wielded them. Yes, he believed Bard had more arrows and didn't want to take any risks. So he quickly turned around, ignoring the governor, who sat down and wet himself in terror. "Filthy bug!" he roared as he rushed toward Bard, who closed his eyes in frustration. He had failed. Just as his ancestor had failed. He could only watch as the dragon charged toward him with fervor, flames blazing around him. It would be useless to flee once the dragon had him in sight. He readied his bow with regular arrows. At least he would fall trying. He saw Smog coming closer and closer, fire building in his jaws, clearly unwilling to risk a close encounter, fearing there might be more black arrows. It was at that moment Bard saw him, a swift figure charging across the rooftop, flanking Smog, who didn't have time to react. The figure leaped high, plunging a sword into the membrane of Smog's broken wing, tearing it further. Ag! Smog roared in pain as the figure slid down as if tearing through a curtain, pushing off with both feet and flipping backward, landing solidly on a nearby house. Bard saw him. This person had retrieved his black arrow, which had fallen into the lake. "Hey, Smog!" the figure shouted. "I haven't heard the bell toll yet." Finally, Bard could see him clearly. The crackling fire illuminated the figure on this dark night. There, with a wild grin, stood Aldril, staring at Smog with fervor and exhilaration, his eyes burning with a desire for revenge. Smog had not expected this and looked at him with his only eye, his pupils dilated, a deep hatred surging from within. "You're a damn nuisance." Smog screamed with palpable fury, flames streaming from his nostrils. "Just die already." General POV, Aldril, 30 minutes ago. "It seems we finally meet." That magnetic voice made me turn around, only to be left stunned, my pupils dilated. Standing before me was an extraordinarily beautiful woman. Her fine black hair fell over her hips in all its splendor, subtle stardust sparkles danced throughout it. The fabric she wore appeared delicate, as if woven from a radiant star itself. Her presence exuded grandeur and tranquility, as if the very moon goddess had descended to the mortal world. Her face was otherworldly, with high cheekbones and a refined jawline that only enhanced her beauty. Her eyes were like two burning blue stars, where one could easily get lost, as if the Big Bang itself exploded within them. I was captivated by such beauty, an absolute masterpiece. For some reason, I felt a strange closeness to her, as if something within me burst forth, unleashing a stellar torrent akin to a quasar, radiating energy that enveloped my entire being. My instincts told me the name of this woman. How could I not know? I stood before the most feared woman, even by Morgoth, the one who ruled the Vala and sat upon Manwë's winged throne. "Great Vala Varda, it is an honor to be in your presence," I said instinctively. How could I not? I was not some transmigrated soul with overnight powers. My nature prevented arrogance, and before me was a being beyond anything I knew, deserving of respect and reverence. I bowed my head in submission and respect. Just gazing upon her face for a few seconds was an honor no mortal could aspire to. After a few moments of silence, I felt at ease with her, a stillness broken by her enchanting laughter. "You are very different from her," she said as she approached. From the corner of my eye, I observed her nearing me. "Raise your head, dear child." Her delicate porcelain-like hands lifted my chin, and now with my face raised, I could once again admire this exquisite work of art. She looked upon me with deep care and affection. "You are a blessed variable by the great Eru," she spoke, her thumb gently caressing my cheek. "You are not bound to a predetermined fate, so return," she said with a smile. "This time, I shall prevent you from entering Mandos's domain. Go back and shine like the radiant star you are." Her words filled me with a renewed energy. The breeze that blew against my face was cold yet comforting, as if nature itself embraced me. In that moment, I felt the icy chill of the lake. I opened my eyes. I was lying at the bottom. The warm current I'd felt was Varda's blessing, amplified by her presence. The elven stone still resting on my chest had been enhanced by the energy of the blessing. My hands, which once looked ashen, had returned to their natural color. My ribs had healed long ago, and my vision was now clear. The lake's darkness no longer hindered my eyes. I pushed myself up from the lake floor with my elbows, propelling myself toward the surface with my feet. My fight is not over, I thought as I rose at high speed. A dark, radiant figure danced within the lake. Anglical, with its black glow, responded to my call. It was only a matter of time before I grasped it tightly. Forgive me, I will not fall again, I thought. The sword connected to me, glowed briefly, indicating its understanding. Present, I'm sorry, I said with a mocking smile. But I won't die so easily, I spat at the dragon, who glared at me with rage. His single yellow eye reflected my figure. This time, it would be easier to face him. His broken wing had reduced his mobility. I looked away for a few seconds as I retrieved the dark arrow from the lake. Take this, find the perfect moment, I said to Bard. I'll keep him distracted. Yes, with Bard, we had a chance to kill Smog. I didn't care about the points I'd earn if I killed him alone, no. This dragon had to die, with or without help. Bard nodded, catching the black arrow, a sight that did not go unnoticed by Smog, who roared in displeasure. I will kill you both. His massive body charged with all its speed, however, his broken wing posed a significant disadvantage, giving both of us time to flee. Bard ran toward nearby houses, while Aldril accelerated, sprinting across the rooftops of burning homes. Boom crack, the houses Smog passed by were being shattered, each step bringing destruction. The structure that kept the city afloat was collapsing. It was a miracle it still held together, thanks only to the type of wood it was built with. They said it was strong, but not enough to withstand the weight of a dragon. The dense air, thick with smoke and fire rising from the debris, was a slight hindrance to Aldril's movements. The closer he got to Smog, the more destroyed houses he encountered, which would give the dragon more open space, a freedom he could not allow. Smog did not stay still. He watched as both pests ran in opposite directions. How dare such nuisances flee from him? Would he allow it? Certainly not. He used his massive body, sweeping his tail toward the nearby houses where Bard ran, sending debris flying with his sheer power. Meanwhile, flames gathered in his jaws, and within seconds, they burst forth like a raging sea, directed at Aldril. Bard reacted quickly, managing to duck, narrowly avoiding Smog's tail swipe. He could only see the lower part of the dragon's tail, and cold sweat trickled down his back. He had to act fast, or he'd seize this chance to play dead, letting Smog focus all his attention on Aldril. That was exactly Bard's plan. With no sign of the first pest, Smog turned all his attention to Aldril, arrogantly assuming he'd crushed Bard. Without hesitation, he rushed toward the place where his flames had landed, knowing this pest wouldn't die easily, and he was right. A quick figure shot out of the blazing inferno, with burning wooden planks crackling beneath every step. Just die already. Smog's nerves were at their peak, his instincts warning him that if he didn't finish off this rat quickly, something bad might happen. With a roar, he gathered more fire in his jaws, preparing to unleash it once again on Aldril, but this time, hitting the target wouldn't be so simple. The fire spewing from his jaws was like a flamethrower, sweeping horizontally across nearby houses and debris. Each crackle was a warning of how dangerous it would be to get caught in those flames. Aldril ran with the speed of a cheetah. The surviving townspeople had already fled in the opposite direction of Smog. Only corpses remained, engulfed and turned to dust by the dragon's flames. In the distance, Aldril spotted a boat filled with gold and a cowering, trembling man. He clicked his tongue, realizing he'd have to change direction to keep the flames from incinerating that person. If only Aldril knew it was the governor. He wouldn't have cared if he burned. With a powerful leap, thanks to his attributes, he reached the roof of a house about 9 meters high, proof that enhancing his abilities was the right choice. He quickly ran across the roof as flames crackled behind him, Smog continuing to spit fire like an endless torrent. Aldril dashed along the ruined roof, dodging holes left by Smog's rampage. In the distance, he spotted the bell tower, with Smog only inches away. This would be a perfect spot to deliver a fierce, lethal blow. He moved quickly across the rooftops, while impatience etched onto Smog's face. The dragon was growing tired of spitting his powerful fire breath. His broken, torn wing membrane was causing intense pain, making it hard to fully concentrate. When Aldril reached a blind spot behind the tower, Smog finally ceased his fire, quickly turning around and almost smashing the tower. However, he couldn't catch sight of the elusive rat. With an angry roar, Smog unleashed another torrent of flames around him, hoping to injure or flush out the rat from his hiding spot. How naive Smog was. While he continued to pour out his torrent of fire, he didn't notice Aldril at the top of the tower, in his perfect blind spot. There, majestically perched on high, Aldril waited. But what was he waiting for? The answer came in the form of a white light speeding in his direction. Like a shooting star, that light fell toward Aldril, who leapt from the tower as it approached. The glow settled onto his left arm, gradually dimming to reveal Anguirel in all its splendor, answering his call and arriving at just the right moment. In mid-air, Aldril slightly curved his body, his arms swinging diagonally toward his back. Both swords gleamed brilliantly, and at that moment, Smog sensed something. He stopped spewing fire and slightly turned his head, and there he saw it. A gleam illuminating the dark night, as if the very stars had descended. But he recognized it. The rat had exploited his blind spot. Aldril began spinning rapidly, like a circular saw, his form blurring. Smog saw in slow motion as Aldril descended onto his head, a searing pain jolting his nerves, but it didn't end there. Aldril's rapid spin continued its path. First the head. Then physics took over and Aldril, like a meat slicer, tore through scales and reached skin, the spin slicing from head to neck, from neck to back, until finally tearing through Smog's entire body, ending at the tail. The force of the blow lifted him into the air once he had also torn through the skin of the tail. From above, a fine line of blood could be seen flowing from Smog's wound, and the dragon could do nothing but scream in pain. "It hurts, it hurts," roared the dragon, his tongue lolling from his jaws. His remaining eye was now a blazing red from the intense pain he felt. He had never experienced such agony. It was so overwhelming that, instead of retaliating, he remained stunned, screaming. In the distance, Bard watched Aldril's move with amazement, but as a vigilant warrior, he didn't let the opportunity slip by. He quickly drew the black arrow and placed it in his bow. From this range, the shot was sure. With all his strength, he drew the bowstring. "With this, the debt is paid," he said as he released the arrow. This time, there was no bird whispering the spot to aim for. No. It wasn't necessary. SHISSS, the arrow was launched, its momentum building with each second as if the ancestors, holding their grudges against the dragon, fueled its speed. Smog, lost in his agony, didn't notice it, but Aldril did. As physics took its course, sending him plummeting downward, he adjusted his body. It was fortunate his move had lifted him above Smog's head. The black arrow, flying like a missile, shot toward Smog's one open eye, cutting through the flames in its path, a testament to the force behind it. In slow motion, the arrow continued its trajectory until, at last, splash rrrgghh, the arrow pierced the dragon's eye, and Smog could only roar in anguish. He felt it, death was approaching, and he could do nothing but howl in pain and curse the fate that had brought that half-elf into his life. While Smog roared and lamented, Aldril descended from above like a hawk upon its prey, both swords poised at his head. Just before crashing down on Smog's head, he swung his swords downward, stabbing into the back of the middle horn on the dragon's head. Arg! Smog's roar echoed into the distance, only to be silenced abruptly. His once proud body slumped, his fierce vitality vanishing in an instant. His massive form collapsed, and a boat filled with gold, drawn by the current, drifted toward the waters near the tower. The governor could only watch helplessly as that enormous figure fell upon him, sealing his fate. The dragon, the fearsome Smog, had fallen with the fall of the dragon. A legend was born in Middle-earth. Aldril, the Dragon Slayer. General POV Erebor. Hours after Smog's departure, an uncomfortable silence filled the air. Thorin's sudden change had impacted the group's morale. They were no longer the expedition team, as their goal had been achieved. Now, they were simply dwarves claiming the glory of being in Erebor without the fearsome smog. But at what cost? Their friend and a vital member of their team had fought the dragon for hours, his fate unknown. That fire falling down was smog, said Philly to the surrounding dwarves. Aldril is probably... He couldn't finish the sentence. It hurt him just to imagine they couldn't help their dear friend. The most affected of them all was dear Bilbo. After all, aside from Gandalf, Aldril had been the one he got along with best. Over these months, he had come to consider him a good friend. It was heartbreaking to see him face the fearsome smog alone, without fear and with steadfast courage, a scene that had undoubtedly inspired him. Like Philly, he feared for Aldril's condition. The silent atmosphere was broken by a deep, disinterested voice. What does it matter if that half-elf is alive or dead? He got smog out of Erebor, that's enough, said Thorin, addressing all the dwarves and the hobbit who had followed him on this tumultuous journey. Thorin, said Balin softly, approaching Thorin carefully. What will we do if the dragon returns? With an indifferent expression, Thorin looked into the distance, lost in thought. Then that half-elf will have failed, showing he wasn't worth much, he said with extreme indifference. We'll deal with it if it happens, he continued, causing the dwarf spirits to plummet in response to Thorin's words. Come, the dragon left through the entrance. If that half-elf manages to kill it, we'll have to close the entrance. Why? Wouldn't it be useless to do so? Asked a confused Philly. What was the point of closing the entrance the dragon left through? He felt disconnected, but that doubt didn't last long after Thorin's sharp comment. Do you think a battle with a dragon wouldn't have casualties? He said harshly. Those survivors will come to take refuge in Erebor and try to steal my gold. I won't allow it. Go quickly and close the entrance. With that he turned, disappearing into the darkness of Erebor's tunnels. Shaking his head in disappointment, Balin looked at the stunned dwarves. Come, he said in a low voice, his already somber mood worsening. This Thorin was not the one who had been with them on their journey. This Thorin was different, too different. Hours had passed. Now, everyone was piling stones at Erebor's entrance. Smog's exit had shattered and cracked many walls, including the complete destruction of the entrance. It was during this uncomfortable silence that Bilbo's shout caught the hobbit's attention. It's Aldril's sword, he shouted excitedly, as the sword was softly glowing. Resolutely, Bilbo grabbed it, expecting a reaction of repulsion that did not happen. Instead, the glow grew brighter, confusing the hobbit until the sword suddenly vibrated. The light it emitted illuminated the entire entrance, momentarily blinding everyone present. The sword slipped from Bilbo's hand, but there was no violent reaction as expected. It was a fluid process. They watched as the sword flew swiftly out of Erebor. That's when Bilbo remembered. The swords are bound to me. They'll return to me even if I lose them, Aldril had once said in a morning chat. That memory gave him affirmation, one that made him extremely happy, to the point that he shouted excitedly, Aldril is alive. Lake Town smog had fallen, but his fall was far from silent. Many lives had been lost to his fire and colossal strength. Lake Town had disappeared. How unfortunate, the survivors said. At least we're alive, added others. The dark night was beginning to fall, welcoming the warm light of morning, a sign that Aldril had fought the dragon for more than 12 hours. A feat not comparable to the past deeds of his ancestors, but also a testament to what he was capable of. Aldril! Aldril! Bard shouted, having witnessed firsthand how the warrior fell into the lake alongside the dragon. He feared Aldril had fallen under the dragon's enormous weight. Your fears are unnecessary, Aldril would reply, but right now, he was once again sinking to the lake's bottom, though this time for a very different reason. Blood, magical dragon blood, had completely soaked him. Upon his fall, the blood spilled out, radiating an intense heat so fierce that its contact with water created steam, which quickly turned into mist, obscuring Bard's view. This blood, flowing like a spring, splashed onto Aldril, causing a series of burns. The pain wasn't enough to make him scream, but it was certainly very uncomfortable. An unprecedented reaction took shape at the bottom of the lake. The blood that transformed the water into steam began to cool and, like a whirlpool, gathered around Aldril's body. He felt a terrifying yet calming sensation. Inside him, a battle was brewing. Smog's blood contained magic, a corrupt magic that drove mortals insane. Many who had dared to slay and bathe in dragon blood succumbed to madness. And what was this corruption? Of course, it originated from Morgoth, the darkest being, master of the Balrogs and Sauron's master. Long ago, Morgoth managed to find the hiding place of creatures comparable to the Mare. These creatures were destined to guide mortals and elves once they appeared in Middle-earth. However, these benevolent and wise beings were corrupted by an extremely powerful Vala. Yes, Morgoth had been one of the strongest Vala in his time. His power waned because he left a part of his strength in every being he corrupted, ensuring their absolute loyalty. Despite reducing his own strength, he could still face the other Vala. Now, a battle was raging within Aldril. The magical and corrupt blood of Smog swirled unconsciously toward him, draining the dead dragon in seconds. At that moment, Varda's blessing, the Vala most feared by Morgoth, took action. The purification process triggered a magical battle like no other. Gradually, Varda's power gained ground, purifying the corrupt magic within Aldril's body. Through this process, his strength increased exponentially, and now the strength of a dragon grew within him. With that purification, something strange happened. Aldril, who lay falling in a grayish-red dome, kept his eyes closed. Initially, the process caused him extreme pain, but it gradually softened. The desire to do evil vanished. He felt it, a connection beyond explanation. A vision passed through his mind. There, on an island where the waves struck like warriors besieging a castle, lay a hill. The undisturbed graves of 3 people stood as if time itself had spared them. The words carved in stone were still visible. Morwen, Hurin, and Ninjal were inscribed in the ancient Elvish text. Yet he could read it with clarity, as if seeing through the eyes of an eagle. The vision shifted to the peak of a hill, where a small cabin stood. An elf with downcast eyes and visibly burned hands sat watching the sea. At that moment, a voice he recognized whispered to him, "The stars will guide you to Tol Himling, your first destination. There lies an object of invaluable worth, which will lead you to the resting place of the first guardians." That delicate voice faded, and then the magic fully entered Aldril's body, prompting him to open his eyes. Those majestic amber eyes had changed. The enchanting pupils had disappeared, replaced by the full splendor of reptilian pupils that exuded power and grandeur. For the first time in Middle-earth, a new being had been born under the grace of Eru, a being with the will and hope of an elf, the tenacity and love of a human, and the greatness and strength of a dragon. General POV, Aldril. Where are you? Can you hear me? Bard's desperate voice echoed clearly, even though I was now at the bottom of the lake. The swirling energy within me had ceased. I couldn't comprehend why Smog's blood had flowed toward me like a spring. I felt it seep into every pore of my body, flooding me with unbearable pain, eased only by the blessing of Vala Varda. Now that sensation had turned into strength. For some reason, I felt complete calm, like nirvana. Nothing could disturb me at this moment. I felt indifferent to everything. The dark lake had become much clearer. Something had changed within me. I could feel it. But now wasn't the time to question what had happened to me. I had to get out of the depths. Smog's dried corpse wasn't my priority for now. What could I do without my storage ring? Besides, the scales were still intact, and I doubted there were any fish in this tranquil lake capable of devouring scales tougher than diamonds. There would be no issue if some brave soul ventured for the corpse. It was in the deepest part of the lake. For a normal person, it would take hours to reach this depth. For me, it would only take a few minutes, maybe even seconds with this newfound strength. Like a torpedo, I shot upward, ascending at an incredible speed. Even I was surprised by it. I hadn't had time to check my attributes. There would be time for that later. Aldril. Bard shouted even louder. The fog created by the steam was starting to clear, making everything more visible. Al. He fell silent for a moment, taking in the heart-wrenching sight before him. The once vast city now lay in ruins. With anguish, he noticed many floating bodies, women, men, and children. They had defeated Smog, but at what cost? With clenched fists, he swore that those damned, filthy dwarves would pay. They had been warned and still ignored the danger. Yet he knew the citizens were partly to blame too. He hadn't been the only one to warn them of the danger. Both the princess and prince of Mirkwood had warned them as well. And yet, what did they do? They chose to believe the dwarves over the elves, who were said to never lie. Plop! The soft sound of movement in the water pulled him from his thoughts. Turning, he saw the person he had been searching for. Aldril's head emerged from the water. However, something caught his attention. The wound he had seen on Aldril's head was nowhere to be found. It was as if this man had only taken a quick dip. Only his tired eyes and faint burn marks were signs of the earlier battle. "Here I am," Aldril said in a rough, tired voice. He may have had immense energy surging within him, but the mental strain had taken its toll despite his high mental attributes. He was still a young man by elven standards, so it was normal for him to lack their strong mental resilience. Yes, Aldril could increase his attributes without points, but the process would be slow. With a sigh of relief, Bard scanned his surroundings, choosing to avoid looking at the bodies. The charred wood creaked beneath his steps. Then he spotted what he needed, a boat. It was a miracle it seemed intact after everything that had happened. Leaping onto it, he rowed toward the lazy Aldril, who was lying on his back, wanting to rest for a few moments. His indifferent attitude had made him consciously ignore the dead around him. It wasn't until the gentle ripples caused by the boat snapped him out of his trance. His view was blocked by a hand. "Come on, grab my hand," Bard said. "I'll help you up." I didn't hesitate and immediately took his hand, though I didn't need much help getting into the boat. Once I lay down in the boat, Bard turned his gaze. "I'll take a look around," he said with a serious expression. "I'll be looking for survivors." I nodded, waving my hand. "Do whatever you want." "I'll be resting a bit," I said, lying down to ease the headache that had suddenly come on. "Just let me know if you need anything." With that, I closed my eyes and fell asleep instantly, utterly drained from the battle. Aldril's attitude didn't offend Bard. Who wouldn't be exhausted after facing the dragon? Especially after that fiery descent. He still wondered how Aldril had survived. Was he even human? He didn't know, and now wasn't the time to ask. He had to focus on finding possible survivors, so he quickly began shouting, "Does anyone need help?" The soft glow of the morning sun illuminated the faces of the survivors of Smaug's massacre. Yes, massacre. What other term could describe the loss of so many lives? Now, they didn't know what to do. Their homes had been destroyed by the dragon's relentless wrath. From this distance, they watched with renewed hope as the dragon fell. They didn't know who the brave soul fighting the beast was, but one thing they knew for sure: if that man survives, we will witness the birth of a legend. That thought rippled like a domino effect, becoming a collective sentiment among them. The survivors sailed calmly toward the shores near Mirkwood. From above, Thranduil watched the small black dots gathering toward the coast. "Prepare the soldiers. Help these people," he ordered before pausing. "And get ready to depart for Erebor." He didn't need to look to the side. There was always an elf at his side to relay his orders. With a slight bow, the messenger turned and left to deliver the king's command. "Thorin Oakenshield will not honor the agreement," said Thalwyn beside him. Her calm demeanor betrayed the emotion stirring within her, for she had just witnessed the birth of a legend. That child would no longer be known as the son of Tindamil. No, the boy had left his mark on Middle-earth. It wouldn't be long before songs and tales of his battles spread among the free peoples. Aldril, the Dragon Slayer. A worthy title. Then why do you still keep that dwarf's body? Thranduil asked, to which Thalwyn gave a faint smile. "Because I keep my word," she replied. "Until the dwarves deliver the promised share of gold, I will hold on to this body." She knew they would fulfill the agreement sooner or later. After all, it was clear this dwarf had been very important to them. On the shore, many families, widows, and orphans wept, some for surviving, others for their lost belongings, and many for the loved ones they had lost. But they had reason to be grateful, even if now was not the time. At least 3/4 of those who stayed behind survived. The others, who had fled to the Elven Kingdom earlier, offered a small relief to those who had decided to stay, just in case the dwarves brought the gold. They had prioritized their families over gold, which was why only most of the men in those families had remained. In the crowd, an elderly man cried out with joy, "I saw it! I saw it!" That man with the dwarves was the one fighting the dragon. He and Bard took down the beast. This old man was one of the few who had witnessed the battle, as he had been in the last group to arrive by boat. "Yes," a woman shouted. "I saw it too," she said through sobs. "It's a shame we don't know if they both perished with the dragon." The crowd quickly gathered around those proclaiming to have seen the scene, paying such close attention that they didn't notice when a hunchbacked man with an orc-like face crawled out of the lake. Alfred, exhausted from swimming after being abandoned by the governor, collapsed onto the shore. "What do I do now?" he muttered. The governor was likely dead, and if he had survived, it was probable the survivors would hang him for abandoning them. Yes, many of these survivors had witnessed the governor kicking and killing those who tried to board his boat. However, nothing happened for several minutes, so Alfred remained lying there. It wasn't until a thunderous commotion broke out that he quickly stood to see what was happening. That's when he saw them, Bard and the man who had humiliated him, descending like the heroes of Lake Town. In that moment, an idea crossed his mind, and with a troll-like grin, he ran in their direction. Bard and Aldrilit didn't take long for the two to reach the survivors. Unfortunately, they hadn't found anyone else alive in the city, so Bard quickly rowed toward the shore. They didn't take long to arrive, as at some point, Aldril stood up and used his immense strength to propel the boat faster. Their arrival was far from quiet. A survivor spotted them and shouted loudly, "They're alive! The dragon slayers are alive!" That exclamation filled the grieving hearts of the survivors with joy. They had no leader to follow, and now knowing that Bard, a man who cared for them and fought valiantly against the dragon, was alive, cries began to rise among the crowd, "Let's make him the new leader." Voices calling to make Bard the new governor began spreading among the survivors. On the shore, Aldril and Bard disembarked. The fatigue hit Bard like a brick wall. With the adrenaline fading from his system, he nearly collapsed, but there was no problem as Aldril supported him, draping Bard's arm over his shoulder. "Come on, I've got you," Aldril said as they walked to the shore. "Long live our heroes. Dragon slayers. Heroes. Bard. Bard." The shouts of the crowd welcomed them like a wave, though the scene felt uncomfortable for both Bard and Aldril. Neither of them was used to receiving such praise, especially in a moment so filled with emotions. For Bard, however, it brought some relief. There were many survivors. The hours Aldril had spent fighting Smog had given the townspeople invaluable time to escape. He wasn't in a rush to look around. He knew his children were safe in the Elven Kingdom, but now his thoughts were weighed down by pressing questions. Where would they live? What would they do next? Lost in these thoughts, a familiar voice suddenly broke through the noise. He lifted his head and scanned his surroundings until his eyes locked on a sight that brought tears to his own. His children were there, running toward him with tears streaming down their faces. Relief and joy filled his heart. With a radiant smile, Bard freed himself from Aldril's supporting arm and walked forward to meet them. His children rushed into his arms, embracing him tightly, crying out of happiness. Their father was alive, and with that, the fear that had haunted them since the tragedy finally dissipated. Aldril watched the heartwarming scene, a soft smile spreading across his face. It brought him peace to know so many had survived. As he quietly observed, his eyes suddenly caught a flash of red moving quickly through the crowd. He instinctively focused his gaze and saw the figure heading straight for him with purpose. Before he could react, he felt a warm embrace envelop him. Surprised, he opened his eyes wide as the realization hit him. "Toriel, you've returned just as you promised," she murmured with a trembling voice, clinging to him tightly. Her arms wrapped around him as if she feared he might disappear. The sight of Aldril in his tattered state had struck her heart with a deep sorrow. Without hesitation, she had run toward him as soon as she saw him step off the boat. Now in his arms, she finally felt a sense of peace. "Yes," Aldril replied, his voice firm yet soft, as he returned the embrace with equal warmth. "As I promised, I have returned, my dear Toriel." General POV, Mirkwood Coast, Dad, how are you? Sigrid asked urgently. Just hours ago, she had witnessed that terrifying dragon fall. The hill had provided an excellent vantage point to watch the battle unfold. What a fight it had been! She saw the man accompanying the dwarves, whose name was Aldril, something Legolas and his sister Toriel frequently mentioned, deliver the decisive blow. It was a marvel to see the dragon brought down, but worry still gnawed at her. She didn't know if her father had survived. Now, seeing him exhausted and his clothes scorched, her concerns eased. Her father might be weary, but he was alive, and that was what truly mattered. Tears began to pool in her eyes, shimmering like crystals. "Thank you for being alive, Dad," she murmured as she buried her face in his shoulder, soft sobs escaping her lips. Dad sniffed. Tilda, who had been carried by Bard, wept in her father's arms. Though mature for her age, she was still a child, and the thought of losing her father had filled her with profound sorrow. Now, seeing him alive, her emotions poured out like a bursting dam. Such a touching scene was interrupted by a strange laugh that silenced the crowd, who had been chanting heroes and dragon slayers. Amid the throng stood a hunched man with yellow, crooked teeth and a repulsive face. He walked with a graceless swagger, basking in attention. "I saw it." The great bard faced the dragon with bravery. He killed it with a single arrow. "I propose we make him our new governor," Alfred declared, shamelessly attempting to leech off Bard's newfound fame. He moved quickly through the crowd, only to be blocked by several survivors who stepped in his way. "Stop right there," said a stout woman, her unusually large arm gripping Alfred's shoulder with surprising strength. "It's that bastard, Alfred. He pushed us off the governor's barge when we begged for help," shouted a woman from the crowd, causing Alfred's face to pale with fear. In his foolishness, he had believed the people wouldn't care or that, in their desperation, they would forget his actions. How naive and idiotic. These people had awakened and would no longer be fooled by his serpentine tongue. "Yes, he's the one who kicked us," another added, grabbing Alfred by the shoulders and shoving him backward, making him fall flat on his rear. "Kill him," someone shouted from the crowd. The emotionally charged survivors quickly obliged, surrounding Alfred, holding him down, and beating him. The brutal scene was witnessed by Aldril and Toriel, who stood embracing each other like a couple. They didn't intervene, knowing Bard was already stepping forward. "Enough." Bard's commanding voice rang out, forcing those striking Alfred to stop and step back, clearing a path for him. In just a brief moment, Alfred had suffered many injuries, several broken teeth, a swollen eye, blood trickling from his mouth and nose. Bard approached Alfred calmly, extending a hand. Hesitant and fearful, Alfred took it, and Bard helped him to his feet with firm strength. "There's been enough death already," Bard said fiercely. "There's no need for another corpse. He may deserve it, but the dragon has killed enough of our people for us to become savages and kill one more." Bard's harsh words silenced the survivors, like cold water splashed over their anger. He was right. Were they savages, ready to spill more blood after Smaug's massacre? Of course not. Ashamed, they bowed their heads. Alfred, breathing a sigh of relief at being saved, turned to Bard with his usual repugnant grin. "Yes. Just as Bard said, we are not savages." Who was the one that shut up? Bard snapped. "You're in no position to speak. Go and help those in need immediately." Ignoring Alfred further, Bard turned his attention back to the surrounding crowd. But it was then that he noticed a group of elves arriving with several carriages. Aldril at that moment, Aldril was holding Toriel, who seemed unwilling to release him from her embrace. Not that he minded. The warmth of the elf, her soft curves, and the faint floral scent made him feel at ease. Without realizing it, he closed his eyes, relaxing with the elf in his arms. The warm embrace between Aldril and Toriel was interrupted by a voice so magnetic that it compelled Aldril to open his eyes lazily, only to rest them on an elf of ethereal beauty. Her golden hair seemed to glow like gold under the soft light of the morning sun, and her fair skin contrasted perfectly with her crystalline eyes, as blue as a clear sky. Her gait was elegant, full of grace, and the majesty of her presence rendered the crowd around her silent, as if they were in the presence of a living masterpiece. Indeed, you are the spitting image of your father, the elf remarked, her voice as melodious as water flowing through a stream. Toriel, who until then had remained relaxed in Aldril's embrace, opened her eyes in surprise and gently pulled away. The elf's gaze shifted to Toriel, offering her a smile brimming with warmth. "And you resemble your mother greatly. I regret not speaking to you on that occasion," she said before turning her attention back to Aldril with a mixture of nostalgia, joy, and longing. Aldril furrowed his brow slightly. The elf's words caught his attention. What did she mean by saying he looked like his father? Did she know who his father was? "Excuse me, do I know you?" he asked with a hint of distrust. The elf let out a light laugh that resonated like a bell, magnetic and hypnotizing to those who heard it. "My apologies," she replied, bowing gracefully. "My name is Finduilas, a friend of your father's." Her steps were delicate as she approached Aldril. "Without a doubt, you are the spitting image of Turin. Many might think your hair is a gift from your mother," she said, "but I, more than anyone, know that this raven-black color, like a crow's feathers, is unmistakably your father's." Erebor Thorin, wearing a crown, looked down from above at the dwarves who scurried frantically through the mountains of gold, searching for the precious gem fit for a king. At least, that's what Thorin had declared in his madness. "Have you found it?" he shouted from above, his voice filled with grandeur mingled with frustration and impatience. "No, not yet," replied Gloin, tossing aside a pile of jewels. "Nothing here either," added Beaufort, his sluggish demeanor revealing his lack of effort. His heart wasn't in it. How could it be, after Thorin's attitude had caused the body of his dear friend Bomber to remain unrecovered? "Still nothing," said Dwalin. The same responses repeated endlessly, further fueling Thorin's frustration. "The Arkenstone fell here. Search harder. We will not rest until it is found." At the far end of the hall, Bilbo observed Thorin's back, his hand unconsciously touching Aldril's storage ring. Only Balin was aware that he carried the ring, but the old dwarf chose to say nothing. Time passed, more than 3 hours, and there was still no sign of the Arkenstone. Frustrated, Thorin left the dwarves to continue their search while he made his way to Erebor's throne, the throne that would no longer sit empty, for now it was occupied by Thorin Oakenshield, son of Thrain. By his side were Balin, Bilbo, Dwalin, Keely, and Fili. The other dwarves had stayed behind to search for the gem. Why hadn't Thorin assigned these dwarves to the task? The answer was simple. He considered them his closest companions. Bilbo was there because of the little information he had provided after Smaug's pursuit, though it was clear some lies were involved. A hobbit would never betray a friend. After all, Bilbo valued Aldril far more than Thorin, and worse still, had witnessed Thorin's descent into madness. Leaning on the throne, Thorin frowned like a grumpy old man, his head bowed in thought. "The Arkenstone is still in Erebor, I'm certain of it," he muttered. But then, as if struck by an idea, he suddenly stood up. "Or perhaps Aldril found the gem," he exclaimed, his voice bubbling with anger. "Yes, he must have stolen it," he roared, causing the nearby dwarves to widen their eyes in disbelief. What was happening to Thorin? To distrust Aldril in such a way? Would Aldril even have a reason to take the Arkenstone? Many questions crossed their minds, but they all reached the same conclusion. The gem could not have been taken by Aldril. Bilbo immediately defended his dear friend. "You don't know that." Thorin snapped. "Dwalin, Keely, Fili, go find the survivors and see if Aldril is alive. If he is, bring him here." "But Thorin..." Dwalin began, his calm voice cut off by Keely's defiant protest. "Aldril would never do such a thing, uncle. Something is happening to you. This isn't who you are," Keely exclaimed, stepping forward. He and Fili respected Thorin immensely, but they, along with Balin, were the only ones brave enough to challenge him, even at great personal risk. "Silence!" Thorin shouted, drawing his sword and pointing it at Keely. "You will do as I say, or there will be no place for a disobedient dwarf in this family." The action shocked Fili, who attempted to intervene, only for Balin to stop him with a shake of his head. With a sigh, Balin cautiously approached Keely. "Go, lad. Go find him," he urged. He knew this was the only way to defuse the situation for the two young dwarves. In this state, Thorin wouldn't recognize even his own father, and he might harm his family without hesitation. But Balin. Kili whispered, his fists clenched, his eyes reddened with sorrow. Thorin's actions had pierced his heart with a deep sadness. "Go," Balin said softly, his voice kind. "It's better for you to leave this place," he murmured. "Thorin is no longer himself, and he might not recognize you. Just go." General POV, Erebor Kili, Fili, and Dwalin were already leaving Erebor with their heads bowed low. How did they leave? The answer lay in the rope hanging at the entrance to Erebor. Bofur, stationed as the guard, asked why their spirits were so down, only to shudder at the madness of Thorin accusing Aldril. "How is this possible? Aldril would never do such a thing," he said with sadness. He couldn't comprehend it. Had Thorin lost all reason? Aldril was his companion. No, it would be more accurate to say that Aldril was already a friend. They had fought and risked their lives together. Did that mean nothing to Thorin? "Don't overthink it," Fili reminded him, giving Bofur's shoulder a light pat. Those taps triggered a memory. If Thorin has succumbed to madness, doesn't that mean Bomber's body cannot be recovered? He exclaimed in pure fear. His pale face showed the unmistakable expression of someone who had witnessed the most horrifying sight imaginable. How could he not be afraid? The body of his best friend, Bomber, might now be irretrievable. "I have to speak with Thorin," he concluded aloud, only to turn halfway around before two hands gripped his shoulders. "Don't do anything reckless, Bofur," Kili said with as much tact as he could muster. Now was not the time to confront Thorin, not even for him. Kili, his nephew, acknowledged it. He was certain that, if not for Balin, Thorin would have killed him right then and there. "Then what do I do? Bomber's body won't be recovered if Thorin remains in this state." The desperation in his voice was a stark reminder that this dwarf, standing before them, was Bomber's best friend. With a sigh, Fili patted his shoulder, trying to bolster his resolve. "We wait," he said, pausing as he glanced further into the mountain. "We wait and pray that Thorin regains his senses," he concluded, his slumped shoulders a clear sign of his own doubt. He had no hope. Years ago, his mother had told them about the descent into madness that plagued the line of Durin. "Our family is cursed," she had said while preparing dinner for him and his brother. "Nothing has been the same for our bloodline since Durin's fall," she explained. Back then, they had dismissed her words as mere childhood tales. Now he could see the truth. His stubborn mother had vehemently refused to let them join Thorin. "He may be my brother, but you are my sons," she had said through tears. "What will I do if I lose both of you to our family's madness? If the madness doesn't kill you, the dragon will." Each word, laden with sorrow, had shaken their resolute hearts. Who could bear to see their mother cry? But they had to go. They had to free their people or, at the very least, reclaim enough gold to survive. With heavy hearts, they didn't turn back. They had to forge a better future. Outsiders could never understand the misery, hunger, and fear they endured after being expelled from Erebor. They had lived it. Their childhoods were anything but peaceful: robberies, murders, a cascade of tragedies that had driven many of Durin's people to madness. The tragedy only deepened when most of their men fell to the rusty swords of orcs during their attempt to reclaim Moria, the Battle of Azanulbazar. Erebor's treasure Bilbo and Balin gazed from above at the countless mountains of gold. The dazzling golden glow blinded the eyes and had the power to drive the greedy mad. A sinister touch invaded the hearts of those obsessed with treasure. Smaug's magic only affected those who fervently coveted the gold. It was no wonder that Thorin succumbed to madness so quickly after just a glance. Our dear Bilbo, with slumped shoulders, occasionally glanced at the old dwarf, who kept his unblinking eyes fixed on the treasure. The silent atmosphere unsettled Bilbo, leaving him at a loss for words. Finally, mustering his courage, he looked at Balin. "Balin, if Thorin finds the Arkenstone..." He began but faltered. His nerves gnawed at him, unsure if he should continue. The old dwarf's gaze was warm. "Why am I so nervous?" Bilbo wondered. Balin's patient expression encouraged him to continue, alleviating his anxiety slightly. Taking a few deep breaths, Bilbo regained his composure and asked with renewed determination, "I mean, if Thorin gets it, Could it cure his madness? Balin, still smiling, shook his head, a hint of disappointment shining in his eyes. I don't think so, Bilbo. He appreciated the hobbit's concern, suspecting the reason behind the question. His years of experience had taught him that Bilbo either had the stone or knew its whereabouts. But what good would it do to give it to Thorin? His madness began the moment he laid eyes on the treasure. The dragon's magic still lingers here. Those who covet gold are doomed to eternal madness, Balin explained, much to the hobbit's dismay. Thorin was infected by this magic, just like his grandfather, he said, more to himself than to the dejected hobbit. We can only pray that Thorin becomes the first in all this time to recover from the dragon sickness, he explained. So it's best that the stone remains unfound. But why search for it with such fervor and desperation? Is it true that it grants the right to command the armies of the dwarves? Bilbo asked after a few moments of silence. He wanted to understand, to comprehend Thorin's obsession with that stone. With a sigh, Balin's shoulders slumped, and his elderly figure seemed to age even more during those few minutes of conversation with Bilbo. It is just a precious stone, he said, pausing. It's more about vanity. That stone grants no power. It is simply the vanity of possessing it, he explained. Simple and pure vanity. The echo of footsteps heavy with metal filled the dark green expanse. Stones trembled, and the few animals present bore witness to black shadows moving in formation. Disquieting sounds emerged now and then, and raised spears bore testimony that this black stain was an army of worn armor, rusted swords, and poorly crafted spears. The army of Dol Guldur, commanded by Azog the Defiler, marched toward Erebor. Not long ago, Sauron had given the order to claim this strategic point while he remained in the fortress of Dol Guldur. Foolish goblin. He was unaware that the master he served had already been expelled by the White Council. But even if he knew, he wouldn't care. Far from Sauron, Azog presented himself as an arrogant being, a creature unafraid of anyone or anything. Of course, this was just a facade. Inside his deformed body, his spirit faltered. Yet, he resolved to achieve the vengeance he desired. Marching at the head of the army atop his warg mount, his fierce appearance instilled fear in the orcs behind him. Not long ago, they had witnessed a massive fireball falling near Erebor, attributing it to a divine phenomenon. The ancient blood inherited from the first orcs made them tremble with fear, as if a predator from antiquity was descending upon them. This fear drove many orcs to try escaping, only to be slain as cowardly deserters in the eyes of the others. It was in that moment, as Azog wondered about his son's fate and the lack of news, that the roar of a warg and the panting of an orc caught his attention. In the distance, he spotted one of the orcs who had accompanied his son. How did he recognize him? It was easy to tell. His hideous face, combined with a scar running across it, confirmed his identity. Yes, Azog was not only brutal and violent but also possessed a sharp memory, always recalling the orcs he had encountered, even if only visually. With a growl from his warg, the other warg halted, and the orc dismounted with fear written across his face. He imagined what would happen next. But what else could he do? Speak, was the only word Azog uttered. He wasn't one for long-winded discussions. Orcs were direct, without the need for the fanfare of men or elves. Balg was killed by that human, and was all the orc managed to say. The rest of his words went unsaid. Why? His head had been severed from his body. Azog was already in a foul mood, and now, with the news of his son's failure, it worsened. That accursed human, he growled in rage. He wasn't angry over Balg's death. No, his fury stemmed from his son's failure and the fact that the human elf still lived. What would he tell his master? No, I must kill him myself, he told himself. Now, Aldril was a priority, even above the line of Durin. Mirkwood Coast, women and children will remain here. Bard shouted, having already reached an agreement with the elves. After all, he could now be called a king. Yes, governor was a title for Lake Town, but now, the only place left for the survivors was the valley. A new king had risen. Bard, King of Dale and Dragon Slayer. What an extraordinary man to follow. Those who can still fight will come with me to Erebor, he proclaimed. We will make those dwarves fulfill their promises. General POV Aldril, I met both of your parents, said that beautiful woman, whose delicate golden curls epitomized beauty itself. However, as with Thalwyn, her beauty did not inspire desire or lust. Instead, it evoked respect and admiration. Worthy creations of Eru, connoisseurs of Middle-earth would say. Yet, the focus was not on her beauty but rather on the knowledge she imparted to both Toriel and me. The mere mention that she had known both my parents hinted that this elf was no ordinary being. If her fine golden curls were not enough to signify her status, her words certainly were. As far as I had heard, only 3 elves possessed such striking hair. Vanir, they said, the fairest and noblest of all elves. Without a doubt, they were right. Beside me, a perplexed and curious Toriel eyed her up and down, seemingly admiring the noble poise of Finduila's. "You knew my parents?" she asked, her melodic voice filled with both bewilderment and curiosity. With a nod as delicate as a cotton embrace, Finduila's explained. "Your father was a formidable warrior," she said, her crystalline blue eyes focusing on Toriel's fiery red hair. "And your mother, a splendid blacksmith, I must say," she continued, a nostalgic smile gracing her lips as she looked at the two of us. It was as if the best moments of her life played before her eyes, which shimmered with subtle joy, happiness, and longing. She fell silent for a few seconds, seconds that felt like hours to me, especially as my curiosity about my father grew. Not long ago, I had learned about my mother, which had brought immense joy to my soul. Now, knowing that someone had known my father filled me with both curiosity and fear. Why did he abandon me? Or had he died before I was born? Questions once again flooded my already exhausted mind. Finally, I asked, "Could you tell me who Turin was, my father, from what you've said?" I could no longer suppress the curiosity eating away at me. I felt a subtle shift within myself, perhaps the stirring of my human blood at hearing that name again. A strange phenomenon, I must admit. Since Smog's blood coursed through me, there had been significant changes within. Awakened by my question, her reaction, perhaps to the tone of my voice, was evident. She smiled, as if ready to tell an extraordinary tale. Her lashes fluttered at the mention of Turin's name. If her face did not deceive me, she likely cared deeply for my father. This became even clearer when I heard how her voice grew exceptionally warm as she began narrating a little about him. Turin Turambar, a man who lived among the elves. His beauty rivaled, if not surpassed, that of the ancient Noldor and Teleri, she said with immense joy. An extraordinary warrior, slayer of the first dragon, Glorung, and wielder of the black blade Anglical, she continued before pausing. To speak of him would take more than a day, and I doubt we have that time now. Her words made me furrow my brow, but it wasn't until I heard Bard's voice that I understood. Women and children will hold out until we return. Our friends, the elves of Mirkwood, will assist us, he said loudly, making me raise an eyebrow. It seemed there would be a significant change, and a good one at that. Based on my recollections, it was foolish to bring everyone to the valley, especially with the potential danger of a conflict with the dwarves, which would endanger the women and children. Moreover, this time there were more men alive. It seemed that my intervention against Smog had allowed more people to survive. At a glance, I could see several men gathering around Bard, most wearing chainmail and carrying swords. It seems that while I was distracted, several men resumed the journey to Lake Town, recovering some food and weaponry. It was the right move given the circumstances. And if this were true, it seemed my embrace and conversation had taken a few hours. Time certainly moved quickly when you least expected it. With a sigh, I looked at the pair of elves. "So it seems," I replied to Finduila's words. My conversation with this elf would have to wait. For now, I needed to go to Bard. Despite my exhaustion, I had to press on. The upcoming battle of the 5 armies was just days away. I had to protect my friends. Glory didn't matter to me. I only wanted to keep them safe. "Are you coming?" I asked Toriel, who remained silent, weighing her decision. Finally, she shook her head. "There are still many people who need help. I'll stay to protect them in case of any trouble," she said. I couldn't blame her. She was an elf with a compassionate heart, and the sight of the refugees had softened her resolve. The occasional glances she cast at the crying children pleading for help were proof enough. "Very well," I nodded before turning to Finduilas. I look forward to our next conversation, I said, receiving a nod and a melodious laugh in response. It won't be long, she replied, though her face reflected an internal struggle, as if debating whether or not to reveal what was on her mind. Such changes in expression were unusual for elves, who typically maintained a composed demeanor. It wasn't until I turned to leave alongside Bard that Finduilas finally showed a resolute expression on her face. With a light tug, she took hold of my arm, forcing me to look back at her. "What's the matter?" I asked, bewildered. With a soft sigh, Finduilas released my arm. "Be careful, son of Turin," she said as she stepped closer, catching me off guard when her gentle hands caressed my cheek. The gesture was unexpected, but even more so was the complex mix of emotions I noticed in her eyes. Emotions that would take hours to fully explain. "Just be very careful," she concluded before stepping back. "What just happened?" I wondered, but I eventually let it go. At that moment, warm arms wrapped around me from the side. Toriel, her face slightly furrowed, embraced me. What was going on with these elves? They're not usually this affectionate, at least not from what I remembered, I thought. "Be very careful, Aldril. There's still an adventure left for us to live together," Toriel said, stepping back, her furrowed brow softened by a gentle smile. Her actions were met with a smile of my own. "I will. See you soon," I said as I hurried to catch up with Bard and his group. My spirits were high, and my energy fully restored. I didn't know what kind of magic elves possessed, but somehow, they revitalized me. My eyes stung slightly, and I could feel my pupils changing, something strange I wouldn't uncover until much later. "Legolas, I must leave," he said to Sigrid, who clung tightly to him, as though unwilling to let go. A warm feeling swept over him, and an involuntary smile formed on his face. Not long ago, his father had left alongside the human refugees. If it had been up to him, he would have stayed with Sigrid, helping them, an excuse to remain close to her. However, his mother had approached him with concern. "I have an ominous feeling," she said. Legolas had never seen such an expression on his mother's face before. Something was clearly troubling her. "Something is about to happen, and I fear for your father's safety. Go, my great warrior, and watch over him," she had told him. Although her request might not have conveyed it, she was deeply concerned for her beloved son as well. She knew that if he and Thranduil were together, they were an exceptionally difficult duo to defeat. Hence her request that Legolas accompany his father. "Promise me you'll stay safe," Sigrid said, burying her face in his chest. "I promise," he replied, gently lifting her chin to make her look at him. With a delicate motion, he sealed his lips with hers in a warm kiss. "Rest assured, I will return." Perhaps it was feminine intuition, but like many women, Sigrid felt an ominous foreboding, as though something was about to happen, and this might be the last time she would see her husband, brother, or son. Such scenes were plentiful, and had anyone paid closer attention, they might have realized this phenomenon was anything but normal. Mirkwood, near Erebor, a dark blur galloped with speed and ferocity, the wind sweeping past like a storm, ruffling the horse's jet-black mane, a striking sight even in broad daylight. Its eyes sparkled with excitement, and its constant neighs expressed pure joy. Riding on its back, an elderly man in a gray cloak gripped the reins tightly. His pointed hat had long been lost during a fierce battle, and now the relentless wind swept through his silver locks, occasionally obscuring his vision. Yet, the wild environment didn't deter or frustrate him. On the contrary, the gray-cloaked wizard urged on, "Faster, Shadow Star. We must warn Aldril and the others of the danger ahead." Yes, the elderly man was Gandalf, the Grey Wizard, who had aided in driving Sauron from Dol Guldur. His task now was to warn of the approaching army. His mount? Aldril's horse, whom he had encountered not long ago with Radagast's help. Together, their goal was to reach Erebor. Gandalf knew this horse was among the smartest, even cleverer than some of the dwarves in Thorin's company. He had spoken to Shadow Star about the looming danger and the urgency of their mission. The sight of a fiery ball falling from the sky had only heightened their need for haste. Shadow Star had noticed it too, momentarily losing his connection with Aldril, which caused him to panic. Only Gandalf's calming words reassured him. claiming that Aldril would be fine despite their shared fear. For this occasion alone, Shadow Star allowed the old man to ride him. Galloping at great speed, his sole objective was to reunite with his comrade, friend, and master. Yes, Shadow Star and Gandalf would soon rejoin the group. General POV. The whispering wind howled across the once desolate wasteland. The desolation of Smaug, what a name. At this moment, that wasteland no longer belongs to the dragon who now lies dead beneath the lake. The vegetation, as if reclaiming its life and breaking free from the chains of the dragon's magic, began to flourish rapidly, as though Yavanna herself were present, blessing the once barren land. The scorched marks were now hidden beneath fresh green grass, a phenomenon that would bewilder anyone. But this is Middle-earth, a land filled with magic, and such an event was met with nothing more than mild exclamations from a group of 3 dwarves. "The vegetation is coming back to life," Keely said with excitement, jumping lightly on the verdant grass. His face was full of joy, the somber atmosphere they had felt upon arrival now completely gone. Philly, being the older brother, kept his composure somewhat, but his bright smile and the way he looked around revealed his cheerful mood. Indeed, it's as if the dragon's death released nature, which had been hidden here all along. Dwalin, the gruffest and fiercest of the dwarves, didn't show much reaction. It was surprising, of course, but only that. His mind was preoccupied with how they would approach Aldril and carry out Thorin's orders. "Aldril is our friend. He'll understand the situation, right?" He repeated those words to himself over and over, his furrowed brow and pensive expression not going unnoticed by Keely and Philly, who positioned themselves on either side of Dwalin and wrapped an arm around his shoulders. "What's wrong, Grumpy?" Keely asked with his usual jovial smile. "Yeah, what's got you so deep in thought, Dwalin?" Philly added from the other side. Dwalin, pulled from his thoughts by the brother's arms on his shoulders, grumbled, "Get your hands off me." His habitual gruffness didn't surprise Keely and Philly, who both burst into laughter as they tightened their embrace. With a sigh of defeat, Dwalin didn't argue further. He wasn't in the mood to quarrel with the bothersome brothers. Instead, he relaxed his tense shoulders and answered their questions. "I'm just worried," he began, pausing for a moment. "Did Aldril really steal the Arkenstone? And if he did, can we bring him back to Thorin?" His doubts, now spoken aloud, caused the brothers' smiles to slowly fade. A moment ago, they hadn't considered this, distracted by the changing landscape. But with Dwalin's reminder, their moods soured. "Aldril wouldn't steal it," Keely said with a sigh. "I really don't like the idea of him being treated as a thief." Nodding in agreement, Philly added, "Yeah, and if we explain the situation to Aldril, he'll understand. Besides, I doubt we could even defeat him, even if we tried," Keely said with a dry laugh. "After all, he killed a dragon, something the armies of Erebor couldn't do back then." He knew this because of the stories their mother had occasionally told them. The 3 walked through the now slightly green wasteland, an atmosphere of tension and unease settling over them. The mere thought of going to retrieve the thief left their stomachs in knots. After all, they had faced life-and-death situations with Aldril, who had saved them countless times. Finally, their thoughts were interrupted by distant voices. Looking ahead, they saw how the once-destroyed city of Dale had become crowded with groups of men and the army of those foolish elves, much to Dwalin's dismay. "There are the survivors," Keely shouted, pointing with his chubby, dirt-covered finger. Having played like a child earlier, he had grabbed a handful of dirt, which, for him, had made him feel alive. "Let's hope Aldril is among them," Philly added, his voice cheerful. He couldn't deny his happiness at knowing so many people had survived. It was a significant change. Normally, at most, 100 people would survive a dragon's attack, especially one as deadly as Smaug. Aldril's intervention had been critical. Not only were there more than 100 men who came to claim the treasure of Erebor, many believing the dwarves to be dead and the treasure theirs for the taking, but thanks to Aldril, over 500 men had survived. And more than half of them were well armed, equipped with armor, swords, shields, and some even with bows. They weren't a disorganized group of civilians wielding hoes and sticks as weapons. No, this was an army, one that would do anything to survive. These men had faced death and emerged victorious, forging strong wills. At this point, Not even an army of 5,000 orcs could stand against them. It was well known that orcs were neither skilled with weapons nor well-equipped. Their gear was little more than scrap. Their only advantage was their overwhelming numbers, which was how they had managed to push back humans and elves in the past, known for their dexterity and strength. "Let's proceed carefully and avoid drawing too much attention," said Dwalin, adding this final remark because Philly and Keely were the type who might stroll in as if nothing had happened, potentially sparking a conflict. The three of them would stand little chance against so many humans, and especially against the elves. Ruins of Dale. Not long ago, the surviving men, some with combat training and many guards, had followed Bard, the new king of Dale. Yes, these people had already planned to rebuild the city of Dale. With the dragon dead, it would be a much easier task, provided they could claim a share of Erebor's treasure. They were soon joined by part of the elven army from the woodland realm. The people were deeply grateful to the elves, who had come to their aid in their time of need, providing blankets, food, and dry clothes for those affected by Smaug's attack. Some were even more thankful, as these elves had initially sheltered those who heeded the warnings of the elven prince and princess. Leading them was Bard, the new king of Dale. He marched at the forefront with his head held high. He hadn't had a moment's rest, yet he remained steadfast. It was all for his people and his children. Bard knew the immense task of guiding all the survivors now rested on his shoulders, and he accepted it. After all, he had been destined to lead since birth, having displayed leadership qualities from a young age. They had recently entered the ruins of Dale. The shattered brick houses spoke of the harsh history this once prosperous city had endured. Abandoned clothes, now torn and weathered by time, lay scattered. Numerous carts, blackened like coal, remained standing, a miracle that their forms had lasted this long. "A glimpse of the past," remarked some of the elves. Likewise, the survivors gazed with sorrow at the scene. This city had once thrived with trade among dwarves, elves, and men, one of the rare times when all three peoples lived in harmony. Now, all of that was but a memory. At the forefront, Bard turned to the survivors. "Set up camp. We'll stay here for a few hours," he commanded. Immediately, the group, weary and traumatized by recent events and the hours-long march, let out tired sighs and began gathering what little wood was available. Some came from carts, others from houses. The hours of walking had brought them to sunset, and night was fast approaching. They prepared bonfires to heat the food, graciously provided by the elves. The hours passed. King Thranduil, accompanied by his son Legolas, soon arrived at the tent prepared by the elves who had traveled with the survivors. Inside, by the king's courtesy, were Bard and Aldril, both dragon slayers in their own right. The title was more fitting for Aldril, who had taken on the brunt of the battle against Smaug. However, Bard had also earned the title for his unwavering resolve in defending the city. "King Thranduil, your majesty," Aldril and Bard said simultaneously, showing the appropriate respect. While Aldril was more familiar with Thranduil, he extended courtesy to the elf of countless years and experience. Thranduil nodded in acknowledgement. "It is good to see you, especially you," he said, smiling warmly at Aldril. "You have achieved a feat worthy of your lineage. Undoubtedly, this opens the door for you to step out from your mother's shadow." And in a way, it was true. Such a deed had helped Aldril step away from the shadow of his mother, Tindamil, particularly in the eyes of the elves. Many had witnessed the meteoric fall of Smaug. Not even Tindamil herself could have survived such a feat, or so the elves believed. It was easy to know this, as Aldril had become well known among them since beginning his journey, courtesy of figures such as Galadriel, Elrond, Glorfindel, Finduilas, Thalwyn, and Thranduil. Drawing the attention of such powerful individuals had placed him firmly in the spotlight among the elves. "Thank you for your kind words," Aldril replied courteously, bowing his head slightly in gratitude. Thranduil, pleased with Aldril's good manners, nodded in return. The boy had undoubtedly inherited the demeanor of his father, Turin, which made Thranduil appreciate him even more, unlike his mother, whom he found rather disrespectful. Setting aside the topic of Aldril, Thranduil turned to Bard, the new king of Dale. "Do you plan to head to Erebor tonight?" he asked, having heard of this from his men. "Yes, I don't want to waste any more time," Bard said while nodding. "If the dwarves survived, I don't want to miss the chance that they are alone," he added. Thranduil, being the wise king he was, detested unnecessary conflict. If the dwarves had indeed survived, as his wife suggested, he planned to negotiate an agreement with them for a share of Erebor's gold. Avoiding needless conflict was his priority. With wisdom in his voice, he looked at Bard and said, "It would be best to wait until dawn." This caused Bard some consternation. He was about to ask why, but Thranduil anticipated his question and replied before Bard could speak. "Look at your people. They are exhausted. They've just survived a dragon's attack. Let them rest tonight. Early in the morning, I will go with you. And if the dwarves are still alive, we will try to negotiate with them." After some consideration, Bard accepted the advice willingly. The survivors were indeed fatigued from their journey, and many were mentally drained. They certainly wouldn't be in the best condition for a confrontation. From a distance, they had seen Erebor's gates sealed with a pile of stones that had clearly been placed recently, indicating that the dwarves were still alive. "Thank you for the advice, Your Majesty," Bard said. "If you'll excuse me, I need to inform my men to rest tonight," he continued, giving a slight bow before leaving Thranduil's tent. Outside, he encountered the unsightly Alfred, who had clung to him like a leech for the time being. "Let's go, Alfred. We need to inform everyone that we'll rest tonight," Bard said as he walked on without giving Alfred a second glance. "As you command, my lord," Alfred replied with deference and submission. What else could he do? Serving Bard was the only way to stay alive amid a crowd that wanted him dead. Alfred was simply biding his time, waiting for the right moment to escape, enduring his role as Bard's servant in the meantime. What no one knew was that, a few hours earlier, a raven had flown out from Erebor. Its destination? The Iron Hills. This raven, one of the ancestral messengers of the dwarves, had returned after Smaug's death. Seeing elven and human soldiers arriving in the valley, Thorin had sent a message requesting aid. "We have reclaimed Erebor. Come to our aid against the greedy." "General POV, I see a good ruler in him," said Thranduil to those present in the tent. "But he still needs to mature a little," he concluded, turning around and fixing his piercing blue, crystal-like eyes on Aldril, whose attention remained focused on the prominent exit of the tent. "He is young, he will grow and learn," Aldril responded in his usual calm and serene tone, as if the events leading up to his departure had not affected him. He stood firm, like a wall of bronze. "Your words are like those of an old man who has lived through countless winters, Dragon Slayer," Thranduil added with a casual laugh, now directing his attention to a bottle of elven wine crafted in the depths of his vast kingdom. "It's as if the battle with a dragon has granted you the wisdom of an elder," he continued while pouring the smooth, reddish liquid, reminiscent of the fruit it was made from, into two gleaming, pure silver goblets, the wine flowing like a calming river. It was a gesture of goodwill from the king of the woodland realm, a ruler with a past filled with victories and shadows. His wise eyes, rich with life's experiences, watched contemplatively as the wine was poured. Once finished, he took one of the fine silver goblets and offered it to Aldril, who maintained a polite smile in response to the wise elf king's comments. "If you don't mind, I would like to know, what was it like to fight such a creature?" Thranduil asked as he handed the goblet to Aldril. The latter gently swirled the wine in small circles, admiring how it moved like a song within the cup. "I must say, it was an extremely challenging experience," Aldril finally answered after a brief silence. "I came close to death, King Thranduil. That fall broke my bones, and my consciousness drifted into the heavens," he recounted with a contemplative gaze, lost in memory. "Soft meadows, with petals that delicately caressed my being, obstructed my vision. The stars in the firmament illuminated the place," he paused, leaving Thranduil curious before taking a sip of the fine wine to moisten his dry throat. "It was then that, in my vision, the most ethereal woman I have ever seen appeared before me. Her mere presence radiated warmth and tranquility, her silky hair seemingly woven from the stars themselves, with the occasional gleam of comets in her beautiful eyes. There before me stood Vala Varda, one of the most beautiful and powerful of the Vala," he concluded with grandeur in his voice. How could one not gain wisdom after being graced by the presence of one of the most significant figures in the world? Adding that the blood of Smaug had given him a little more wisdom than usual, he was still young and prone to mistakes. Though not as wise as Gandalf or the elves of countless winters, He possessed a maturity akin to a man who had seen 60 winters. Elantari, murmured King Thranduil in disbelief. His words grew short. What could he say? Even with his wisdom, he could not find the right words to express his thoughts. You must hold great importance if the creator of the stars was present in your moment of agony, he said, his throat suddenly feeling dry for some reason. Yes, it seems Middle-earth still has need of my presence. Night had claimed the sunlight, the bright stars illuminating the dark sky, untouched by the vile, watchful eyes of dark forces. Echoes of fatigue and joy resonated through the city of Dale. For a moment, it felt as if the past had come alive, allowing cheerful voices to fill the gatherings in what was once a prosperous city. I was there, trembling with fear before the dragon's majesty. One of the surviving guards recounted to the crowd gathered around a crackling bonfire that lit up the central square of the town hall. Among the men were some elves, mingling, laughing, and paying attention to the guard's tale. From a distance, Bard observed, his face filled with mixed emotions. He would not deny that he was glad for the high number of survivors, but a hidden fury burned within him. All of this could have been avoided if not for the dwarves' greed. But there was no turning back now. At dawn, he would personally go to claim what Thorin Oakenshield had promised. He would not consider him the king under the mountain until he proved himself as such. On the other side of the valley, in a fork where ruins were gathered, a group of 3 dwarves sneaked around. Their small stature allowed them to go unnoticed by the guards. Little was said about their skill in hiding, one they had honed throughout their journey. Where could Aldril be? Keely whispered, fearing that external ears might hear him and discover their presence. I don't know, but I hate hiding from these elves, Dwalin added, walking between the 2 brothers. His face, perpetually twisted into a frown of anger, reflected his disdain for elves, and even more so the fact that he now had to hide from them to avoid being caught. Stop complaining, Dwalin. This isn't the time for it. Stay more alert, Philly said from behind him. Unlike the grumpy dwarf, his usual nickname for Dwalin, Philly didn't harbor as much animosity toward elves. His youth meant he bore no deep grudges against them, though he did feel some bitterness for having been imprisoned without cause. Silence fell over them as their hurried steps revealed the urgency with which they searched for their friend. How could they know he was still alive? He surely died against the dragon, other dwarves might say if they didn't know Aldril. But not these 3. Their faith in his strength and instincts told them Aldril was alive. And as if their thoughts were manifesting, they spotted him in the distance. Aldril was walking toward one of the ruined houses, inside of which a small fire burned, providing warmth against the biting cold. There he is, Keely whispered joyfully. Were it not for the inappropriate timing, he would have danced and sung in Dwarvish. Grinning from ear to ear, Philly clapped both Keely and Dwalin on the shoulders. Let's go, he urged with excitement. They advanced quickly toward the house where Aldril rested, only to hear booming laughter filled with joy. Cautiously, the dwarves moved along the rocky blackened path that still bore the scars of ancient tragedies. Peeking carefully, they spotted a figure easily recognizable by his gray robe. It seems our friends are spying on us. Why don't they join us? Said a vibrant, joking voice, brimming with life despite the white hair and beard of its owner. Aldril, like the old man, turned his gaze toward where the dwarves hid. His instincts, now sharpened by the blood of Smog, had immediately detected the group approaching his resting place. Of course, join us, Aldril said with a radiant, cheerful smile, his good mood evident. Aldril / Gandalf. Keely and Philly exclaimed with overflowing joy, rushing inside without hesitation and laughing as they entered. Yes, the old man was Gandalf, who had returned just a few hours earlier with his faithful companion, Shadow Star. The horse now rested outside, unseen by the dwarves as its form blended seamlessly into the night. It's good to see you again, Aldril said, standing to let the dwarves embrace him. The atmosphere shifted in an instant, becoming one of pure joy. Though their separation had been brief, it felt like years to them. Finally breaking free of Aldril's embrace, the dwarves turned their attention to Gandalf. Our great wizard friend has returned, Keely exclaimed, leaping and dancing. Now, nothing stopped him from expressing his happiness. Philly joined his brother in dance, celebrating their reunion with abandon. Only Dwalin remained still, his mind focused on their mission. Yes, he was glad for the reunion, but duty called. Aldril noticed this, his eyes narrowing in observation. Sensing Aldril's gaze, Dwalin stepped forward. "Aldril, we need to talk."
And that concludes this episode. If you enjoyed it, I'd seriously love it if you guys could leave a like on the video, as it genuinely helps out so much, and it keeps me going, plus it takes only 1 second. That said, have a wonderful day. See you in the next one.